Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from our 2026 Crops webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about homegrown research, which is referring to the 8 AgriARM sites that are across the province in Saskatchewan. My name is Ali Noble, and I am the Crops Extension Specialist out of the Prince Albert Regional Office with the Ministry of Agriculture, and I'm going to be chairing this morning's event. CEUs are being offered for CCAs on this webinar. In order to get the credit, you must attend the entire live event, and there will be a QR code shared at the end of the presentation to collect your credit. If you missed the code and attended live, please just email us afterward and we will make sure to get you your credit. Before we start the formal presentations here this morning, I have a couple items to share. So as you can see on your screen, we have crop extension specialists that put on this webinar series every year. We work out of 10 different offices from across the province, and each of these offices contains a wide variety of specialists that can help you with any agriculture-based question. To connect with our specialists, please call your local regional office or the Ag Knowledge Center at the number provided. There are 8 AgriARM sites located throughout the province that are dedicated to bringing the industry Saskatchewan-specific information and demonstrations on new and existing agriculture practices. We will have speakers from each of these ones this morning discussing research projects that were done locally. You can find out more about each of these sites through the following QR code. The sites are in several different regions throughout the province, as you can see on the map here. Through having them throughout many different regions in the province, it allows us to get different regions and the best snapshot of different growing season lengths and the impacts of soil zones as well. Many projects are run at multiple sites to capture data that showcases a variety of the different regions. On the AgriARM website listed here, you can find upcoming events, current projects, fact sheets, and research updates. Here you can also see that throughout the summer, they host summer field days where you can actually attend in your local region. This handout is also attached to the webinar. If you have ever heard the words on the radio, Saskatchewan is 98% completed harvest this week, then you will likely have heard of the crop report. My colleagues in the Moose Jaw office write the crop report each week during the growing season based on data collected from crop reporters across the province. I'd also like to thank all our current crop reporters for helping us achieve the comprehensive report, but we always invite new ones to join us so we can get a better data set. I also want to mention that the 2026 Crop Diagnostic School will be at Swift Current, Saskatchewan this year on July 29th and 30th, with more details coming soon on that event. Lastly, we want to make sure that everyone is aware of the funding available through the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. We're going to get into our first set of presentations here. Along with this information, we also have the additional resources for everyone under our handout section in the chat box area of the toolbar. These will be shared with the recording after the webinar is complete. Today's presentations are going to be followed with a live Q&A from each speaker. The main hub for today's webinar is going to be your webinar screen, and as mentioned, we will share relevant downloadable handouts with you in the chat box area. The entire session will be recorded, so if you miss anything or want to re-watch anything, you're more than welcome to after, and these recording links will be sent out over the next week to anybody who's registered to the webinar. At the end of the presentations today, an evaluation is going to pop up, which if you ensure to share that out, we really appreciate the feedback you give on these webinars. So just a couple housekeeping notes to include as we go into our webinars here this morning. If anybody has any questions during any time in the presentations, you can type them into the question box on the right side of your control panel. And we will also try to get as many of your questions as possible, but we might be limited due to time. Your questions will remain anonymous and you're only going to be sent to me. During the presentation, you'll be muted, so there's no feedback that will interfere with the audio. So with that, we're going to get started with our first presenter, Mike Hall. Mike Hall is from the East Central Research Foundation, located near Yorkton, Saskatchewan. So we'll start with you whenever you're ready now, Mike. All right, I can see your presentation or your PowerPoint screen, but the presentation mode isn't up yet.
How's that?
Perfect. I can see the picture and you're on your title slide, so you're good to go.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. So I'm retiring soon, so I thought it'd be fun just to touch on some of the trials that I was leading over the period of 1995 to present day, basically. So this is me in the late 90s. I was a new crop specialist up in the Peace region. I lived in the nosebleed section. I was way up in Fort Vermilion, which is only 200 kilometers south of the Northwest Territory border. And I had to prove to bankers that, yes, we do grow crops up there. And I'm standing in front of an average canola crop here of about 25 bushels at the time. And I led a bunch of projects. I lived on the research farm at Fort Vermilion and worked out of there. And it was a great place to learn about soils because there were a lot of crappy soils in the area. Case in point, here's a field that I was called to that was phosphorus deficient. And it was phosphorus deficient because the farmer had been using rock phosphate as a source of phosphorus. And of course, we know it takes about 100 years for that to come available. Um, and the dark areas that you see out in the field here are where he had manure in the past. And you can see that the symptoms are showing up on the old leaves here, and that's because phosphorus is mobile in the plant, but phosphorus is not mobile in the soil. So we weren't able to really save this crop by broadcasting any phosphorus on the surface. And when you went back to the manured and the unmanured places, you can see that the yield decrease was quite large for the phosphorus deficient areas, and also that the maturity has been delayed. This is phosphorus deficient canola. However, my experience, you rarely see the purpling in there. And purpling is a terrible indicator of different things because basically purpling means the crop is under stress and it will turn purple if you step on it even. So from my experience, this is a phosphorus deficient canola crop. And the reason I know it's phosphorus deficient is because where I had put down phosphorus, it looked like this. So oftentimes the only symptoms you see are reduced plant growth. And, and phosphorus is part of ATP, the energy source. And so you just get very small plants, limited growth. And we had a lot of wood ash in the area because we had a bunch of TP burners that were associated with the sawmills in the area. And there's a lot of phosphorus and potassium that's in that wood ash. But I used this demonstration to show that a lot of it was not readily available. It was like putting rock phosphate down. So this is a phosphorus deficient canola field, and you can see the check, and then you can see 4.5 tons per acre of wood ash, and then you can see the equivalent amount of phosphorus and potassium that was in that wood ash applied as conventional fertilizer, and you can see the crop is doing much better at the bottom. But there was a good role for wood ash in the acidic soils, and of course in the Peace Country we had lots of acidic soils, and this particular site here had a pH of about 5. And so we were looking at different applications of lime and wood ash. And problem with the wood ash though is it had a bunch of things that the locals were calling clinkers in it, which was basically mud that was getting heated to high degrees and was kind of coming out as glassy chunks in there. But the wood ash had a pretty good calcium carbonate equivalency, and it worked quite well. You can see here that, if I've improved the growth of barley, with barley sensitive to acidic soils, and alfalfa is particularly sensitive to acidic soils. And you can see that the wood ash has improved the situation there. But probably one of the better things we did for the locals was we introduced them to a variety called Alleycat of wheat. And it's called Alicat because it was bred from Catepwa, and it's resistant to aluminum toxicity, which is, of course, a problem that occurs with acidic soils. And we increased the yield from 35 bushels using plain old Catepwa to 50 bushels using Alicat. So that worked quite well. Um, this is not my picture. It's taken maybe a little bit before my time out of Beaver Lodge, I think. And they were fooling around with lime on their soils there. And you can see how well it's improved the soil tilth there, because the black areas are where the lime has been applied. And what you're seeing in the foreground is where it hasn't been applied. And you can see the rain has puddled on the surface, whereas where the lime has been put, the rain has moved straight into the soil. So that's another benefit of the wood ash. I also had a really terrible sulfur deficient field near me, and it was so uniformly sulfur deficient. We were wondering if it was a group 2 injury symptom at the time. And we put down some ammonium sulfate, and you can see that on the left where there's lots of pods, and then on the right, there's absolutely nothing. Here's a more modern picture of sulfur deficient canola where, you got the purple cupping leaves, the white or the pale yellow flowers and purple pods. And this looks similar too. It's got all the same symptoms. It doesn't have the purple cupping leaves so much, but it's got the purple pods and the pale flowers. But in this case, it's group 2 carryover. And but the difference here, you can see that the shortening of internodes around the pods, you get the sort of pincushion effect. If we go back to an old picture from the Peace Country, this is a real good pincushion look to group 2 carryover on canola. So going back to that sulfur field, decided to put some trials out there, and you can see where this is where I put the ammonium sulfate and then no sulfur here at all, and no sulfur, no yield. That's how bad the site is. And I tried Tiger 90 too. So I took the Tiger 90 with elemental sulfur. I put it on in the fall broadcast application, let it go through freeze thaw cycles there, and then incorporated it into the soil. And I got almost no sulfur being released from it at all, because if you had any sulfur release, you would certainly see a dramatic improvement in canola yield at this site. But this site, probably it was sandy and probably had very low microbial activity. And we have better soils down here, but I have seen lots of cases where elemental sulfur was not providing the sulfur that was required for some fields. And so it's one to be careful with. Here we have sulfur deficiency in cereals, and you'll note here that what you're seeing is the youngest growth is yellow. That's because sulfur is not mobile in the plant. Plant can't sacrifice the old leaves to help the young leaves, which is sort of the opposite of nitrogen deficiency, where we see the yellowing occurring with the older leaves. And close to me here in Yorkton, I had a farmer saying that, oh, I've got this field that will grow canola, but it won't grow wheat. And I'm like, that's odd. I don't know what would be doing that. And eventually I worked out it was sulfur deficiency. So he's putting sulfur down with his canola, but not putting it down with his wheat. And I proved it was sulfur deficiency by broadcasting a small area of ammonium sulfate. And beside it, I broadcasted an area of urea that had the same amount of nitrogen in it that was coming along for the ride with the ammonium sulfate. And you can see that in the middle, you got this green patch greening up. And so I proved that it was actually just sulfur, but he seemed unimpressed by me working that out. I guess it was too simple. So then back to the late 90s, everybody and their dog was doing a fall seeded canola trial, and it was a dormant seeded. So we'd seed canola really late in the year so that it wouldn't germinate, and then would come out of the ground really early the following spring. And boy, we could harvest that way earlier than conventionally seeded canola, and everybody was trying this. And seed coating places were coating the seed, putting polymers on the seed so that it wouldn't germinate prematurely in fall, and because once it germinates in fall, the game's over. But what we often found, while we could be harvesting much earlier, which was certainly a benefit in the peace country, we were taking the yield penalty for it. They were shorter plants. And in this particular instance, you can see we got 50 bushels by seeding October 29th, 1998, and then seeding the following spring, 64 bushels. So I think that's one of the reasons, apart from the risk, that this practice never caught on. I was also involved in the field schools at that time, and one of my favorite demonstrations I did was I had a seed lot of canola that had good vigor and another seed lot that had poor vigor, and they had identical germinations. And if you seed them under ideal conditions, they emerged equally well. But if you stress them out by putting some seed place fertilizer, you can see the high vigor seed is doing much better than the low vigor seed. So it was just a demonstration of the importance of vigor testing at the time. And this would relate to a more cold, wet conditions during seeding. You got a better chance of getting a better emergence out of that. So fast forward maybe 10 years now, we're into 2015, and I'm at the Yorkton area now, and so the Yorkton Research Farm, which collaboration, which was Parkland College at the time and ECRF, started fooling around with manipulator. And boy, I had really good experiences with manipulator the first time I tried it. I tried it on Good Eve, which was a tolerant or a good resistant variety to lodging. And I also tried it on Unity, which had poor resistance to lodging. And you can see the Unity is going down hard already August 1st, whereas the manipulator is keeping the crop standing. And this translated into a 10 bushel increase in yield. And even for Good Eve, I got another 5 bushels from using it, even though the lodging wasn't as bad with that. So that was a great experience. And then I went for years and years and years after that and never had the same result again until just recently, a couple of years ago. A lot of dry periods in there. We looked at winter wheat seeding date, and basically we found that our falls were warmer and we could push that seeding date farther into the fall and still get good results with winter wheat. And we went out to September 29th and still had very decent yields associated with winter wheat. This was a very popular trial. Got a lot of traction with this, where we basically demonstrated quite well not to be putting urea down on snow. And this is what that particular treatment looked like. This is what the snow looked like at the time of application. And we had a number of different applications here. And what you're looking at here, the blue bars are yield, and the orange line is grain protein. On the very far right, we've got our check, which is spring side banded urea at seeding, and it's got by far the best yield and the best protein. On the very far left, you've got fall broadcasted urea, but it's early fall, and so that's not ideal. And so we got poor yield and poor protein, which we could improve by the next treatment by putting Super U down, and then we could improve things further by putting the broadcast applications of urea down in late fall and improve it still again with using Super U. And then when we put it on snow, we had very crappy yields and very low protein, and using Super U at that time did no favors for us at all. When we used to grow a lot of Metcalf barley, and with Synergy coming out at the time, that was a much higher yielding barley, and I thought surely we should be putting more nitrogen down with these higher yielding barleys. And just to prove the point, we grew the two together, and here you're looking at the protein response to increasing rates of nitrogen. This is soil plus fertilizer nitrogen. And let's say 12.5% protein. We don't want to go above that. And so you can see we hit 12.5% protein in a much lower nitrogen rate than we did for Metcalf than we did for Synergy. And if we look at the yield responses and look at those nitrogen rates, well, we'll look at the 110 pound rate, and we're getting 72 bushels of Metcalf there versus 80 bushels of Synergy. But wait, we can push that nitrogen rate higher, and we end up getting in something like 86 there, 86 bushels more. So we should be putting more nitrogen down with the newer varieties of malt barley compared to the old Metcalf. This was a kind of a cool trial too. It was flax. Flax phosphorus trial, and flax relies on mycorrhizal root associations for pea uptake. And anything that disturbs these associations is going to be hard on flax, and that can be growing a non-mycorrhizal crop like canola ahead of time, or cultivating ahead of time. So we put blocks of wheat and canola out there, and then within those we left half of them cultivated, and then the other half were left standing. And then the following year was all seeded to flax, and within each block we looked at increasing rates of, phosphorus. And the flax did way poorer on the canola stubble, which had been cultivated, compared to the wheat stubble that had been left standing. And increasing rate of phosphorus did absolutely nothing to compensate for that lack of mycorrhizal growth out in the field. We also looked at and showed that shallow banding may actually increase nitrogen losses, which sounds counterintuitive, but what's happening there is that you've got this band of urea, which is increasing the pH of the soil locally around there, which drives the ammonium towards ammonia, and we lose it to the air if you don't have enough moist soil packed above it. And so we kind of demonstrated this. It wasn't consistent, but this part was pretty obvious. We have orange, which is urea, and light blue, which is super U. And you can see that when we're broadcasting the urea, the super U increased our grain protein. When we shallow banded, the use of super U also increased our grain protein, but when we were deep banding, there was no benefit from using the super U. And then just this last year, I wanted to grow chickpeas. It was the first time I've ever grown chickpeas, and I was excited about it because I like to eat chickpeas. And I had seen from other researchers that, you can put flax with chickpeas and it'll stress it out and help it to mature, because we don't typically grow chickpeas because we have it's an indeterminate plant, keeps flowering, we have moist conditions, but the flax should stress it out and help it along. And I thought this crop just looked beautiful. I think the trick to growing chickpeas is to have never grown it before. There's not a spot of disease out there. But the problem was we had a dry period followed by some rain in August. And while the flax did a great job of hastening maturity for the chickpeas, it didn't hasten its own maturity. It just decided, oh, rain, okay, I'm going to take another shot at growing again. And so I ended up with very green flax and very mature chickpeas. And eventually I sprayed it out, with Reglone to try and get it combined. And the combining was miserable too, because you had to have the gap wide open on the combine to get the chickpeas through, the cylinder speed really slow. It's not to break the chickpeas, but then I wasn't really threshing out the flax really well. Had the air way down, so I didn't blow out the flax. So I had those god awful dirty samples to deal with. And this is what we got for yield in the end. When we weren't growing it with flax, we had, over 40 bushels of chickpeas. And then as soon as we had the competition with the flax, our chickpea yields went way down. And you can see I got little return in flax and orange to compensate for the loss in chickpea yield. So while others have had some success with this, after 1 year of experience, not a fan. So that brings me to the end, so I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thanks for trying to boil down an entire career into a 15-minute presentation. All right, just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can just type them in on the right side of our webinar screen here, and we will be able to ask those anonymously. So a couple that have come through here, Mike. First off is, if the phosphorus from wood ash isn't available the year of application, do you expect that it would be available in the future because phosphorus isn't very soil mobile?
It will add to it, but I guess it'll go into that. It'll add to it, but it's not going to be available really quickly. But over the long term, the plant will get access to that phosphorus eventually, because it'll go into that equilibrium that sets up between the solution and what's in the soil. But it's certainly not. It's not there right away. It's very, very, very slow process to get it into that equilibrium.
Perfect. And the next question here is, how was the fall and winter applied nitrogen broadcasted in those trials from your 4R1?
So it's small plot work, so it's broadcasted by hand. So we have sort of a system of doing it. We've put tarps out to make sure that the way we do it, gives us a very uniform coverage of the broadcast. So it is done by hand on small plots. So the small plots are 11 by 30 feet in size.
Okay, awesome. Those are the questions that came in this morning. So thank you again for your presentation, and more importantly, the many years you've put into research in Saskatchewan. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Next up, we have Emeldeep from Southeast Research Farm, and those guys are located in the Redverse area. So whenever you're ready here.
Hello.
Perfect. I can see your PowerPoints, but if you want to toss it into presentation mode.
Okay, here you go.
Awesome.
So,
looks great.
Okay, thank you, Ali. So first of all, I would like to thank you everybody for joining this webinar. So the topic I will be talking about is when should the rapidly maturing soybean varieties be planted in Saskatchewan? So this project was 2-year project, and it was started in 2024, and the 2025 was the second year for this project. And this was got funded through Adopt through Saskatchewan Pulse Growers. First, little bit about soybean. Soybean is a member of a leguminous family. That means it can make a symbiotic relationship with the rhizobium bacteria, and it can fix its nitrogen in the soil. And studies have shown it can fix up to 60% of its nitrogen that it needs. Inoculation is important. So inoculation is most important in the soybean, because this rhizobium strain is not native to the Saskatchewan soils, and the name of that is Bradyrhizobium japonicum. And the inoculation can be available in granular or in liquid forms. Seeding window. Typical seeding window for the soybean is from May 10th to May 25. And I picked up this from Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation. Like liability will not cover the crop that is seeded beyond 5th of June. And fourth point is ideal soil temperature for the perfect germination for the soybean is at least 10 degrees Celsius. So these figures are from Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation. And as you can see, it's in 2025, we have around approximately 42,000 acres got insured under Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation. Main question is, why soybean? Saskatchewan Pulse Grower and Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture is promoting pulse crop soybean as an alternative to the peas and lentils. The main reason is Aphanomyces root rot. And as you know, Aphanomyces root rot is affecting peas and lentil crops. And till now, soybean is considered as a non-host for Aphanomyces root rot. Um, Second is the rotational benefit. Soybean being as a leguminous crop, it can fit in between the crop rotation cycles and act as and fix our nitrogens in the soil. And it can also break up our pest and disease cycles because we need to, and it's recommended that every farmer should follow the crop rotations that includes at least every 3 years includes a pulse crop in their crop rotation. Third is with the introduction of new soybean varieties, the maturity is a main reason and limiting factor, but with the introduction of uh, new varieties that take less times to mature, it is possible to plant those varieties and up in the north also, and that is our trial focus also. Another option I have added, like, so it is a good option because it has a more herbicide options, right, wide varieties of groups from 1 to 4 6 9 10 and 14s. And in this trial, all the varieties are Roundup ready that we used. Next is a maturity group. So talking about maturity ratings, different soybean varieties are marked as different maturity group according to the days they take for maturity. If we talk about the location wise, the further north we go, northern side for the province we go, it's 0001. And starting from that, it can go up to 009 in the south in the states. And I would like to uh, say that, like, these maturity ratings are not uh, standardized among all the companies that produced the seeds. So these can be variable, so according to their own norms. Trial objective. So the main, we came up with four objectives, and first was the overall objective is the effect of seeding dates on various early maturing cultivars of soybeans. And second is we want to see the regional adaptation of soybeans with the range of maturity ratings in northern and southern locations of the Saskatchewan. Soybean yield and plant establishment is also, we want to consider that as a main factor to check what is the effect of seeding date and different varieties on yield and plant establishment. And the fourth one is protein content as a quality factor. So the method that we used for implementation of this trial was split plot trial. And as you can see on a map, this trial was uh, planted on all 8 AgriARM locations. And among those all locations, the irrigated location was Outlook was the only location that was irrigated. And we came up with the 2 seeding dates. Early was from 12th to 19th May, and normal seeding date was from 20 to 30th May. And we selected these 5 varieties with different maturity groups, starting from 0005, 6, 8, 9, and 009. That is long season varieties that considered as long season varieties. First slide, before I will go to the plant count, I will bring your notice to the plant height. And as you can see on this, both years data and different varieties, mostly genetic potential is affecting the heights, and uh, the long season variety 0002 has 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 produced tallest plants among all other varieties, and that is relative because it takes a longer times to mature, and it can stay in a vegetative stage longer, so it can have a longer plant height, days to maturity. So that is the most important factor that we are considering among varieties. So if we check those maturity ratings, uh, if you can notice on 0008 variety, and that is consistently taking less days or equal days to mature rather among all other varieties. And those arrow ones, it is it ha- it is those arrow one that has mentioned in this graph, they have a significantly statistically significant less number of days to mature in the both years. In 2024 at Indian Head, it has significantly take less days to mature, and same in Redverse, and all those four locations where the data was available. So it was taking less days, but that was not as significantly with the all other varieties. Um, in 2025, Malfort, Indian Head, Redverse, and Swift Current, the 0008 variety took significantly less number of days to mature rather than all varieties. But as you can see, other sites, it was taking similar or less days to maturity, but it was not statistically significant among all other varieties. So this brings me a question, like, so there is some uh, more research needed about the maturity ratings, so we can have correct data to seed the that particular variety on a particular location. So next is plant density. So this slide I brought up at the little later because I want to compare it with the plant yield. So in 2025, there was a trend seen on the plant density. If you can see, all the northern and central locations in Saskatchewan, like Scott, Prince Albert, Yorkton, Melfort, Outlook, and Indian Head, later seeding date has a more plant density than the early seeding dates. But in Redverse and Swift Current, the early seeding date has a more plant density than the later seeding dates. But in 2025, the plant density remains variable among all other sites. So if I compare that data plant density with the yield in 2024, so unfortunately we don't have a yield data from Swift Current, but in Redverse that plant density has effective has effect on a yield, as early seeding date produced more yield than later seeding date, and same with the other sites, the later seeding date, and that the more plant density leads to uh, more yield in the later seeding dates among those northern and central sites in Saskatchewan in 2024. But in 2025, that data yield data remained variable, as the that I I I looked at the different environmental factors like early frost and moisture deficient, and that was the reason that Scott and Indian has very less yield, because they have a very early onset of frost and they were deficient in the moisture during that season. So this is the yield uh, this is yield of among all varieties. As you can see, the outlook being as irrigated site has the highest yield potential among all other sites, but all other sites remains the, the varieties remained variable. There was not a particular trend that focused which variety is producing more yield. But if we compare the yield of long season variety, it was kind of staying similar, but the height has increased. So long season variety is not giving us as a good chance of getting good yield, but it's more producing vegetative production rather than going that produced to the seeds. And I am pointing out that two varieties, 0005 and 0008 in Scott, and I believe the reason they have a more yield on those varieties, they might have escaped those early frost, because those are early seeding, early maturing varieties. So to compile this, I have made this graph that compare the different moisture rainfall in May and July and August. That was a critical period for soybeans flowering and pod formation. And as you can see, there is a deficient, like in Indian head, the in 2025 they all almost got half the amount of rainfall during those two periods. And the long term, this green line is sitting over there. So almost all the sites are getting has remained deficient in the moistures. That might be a reason for variability in the locations and varieties yield. Protein remained variable among varieties, and and also on different locations. It means the variable. Conclusion. So at the end, I would say yes, there is an effect of location specific variety maturity rating on days to maturity, because later seeding date has early maturing varieties, and that leads, if we seed late, it comes up with the later seeding date will result in early seeding maturity of soybean varieties. Environment, moisture, frost is a key drive factor for successful soybean crop production. As you can see in different locations, there was early onset of frost that has killed some pods during that pod formation, and with that reason, the protein went down and the yield went down on those locations. Seeding of long season soybean varieties become questionable in terms of yield and days to maturity. Yes, so as we have seen, the 00 varieties, it's not resulting in good yield. With the longer season, it has to produce that yield. So as I mentioned earlier, different maturity groups, there was a variability among the companies for those maturity ratings. So further research is needed to develop more concrete recommendations for optimal seeding strategies across different soybean maturity groups. So as we can see, 0008 is maturing early than 0005. So that means there is a question over there for a maturity, rating the maturity groups in soybean varieties. So I think I'm a little early, but at the end, I would like to acknowledge the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers for funding this project, and through Adopt funding, and seed sponsors and all the collaborative sites for their hard work on bringing this trial to for completing this trial. And for further questions and keeping an update, you can email me, and we have our new email ID and website, that I have mentioned on this one. And so you can contact us over there. And I think that's all, Ellie.
Awesome. Thank you for the wonderful presentation there. So a couple questions have rolled in. Number one is, for the soybeans, was there any phosphorus applied at seeding or any starter nitrogen, or was it just the inoculant?
No, it was so phosphorus was applied during according to the soil test at different locations, because different locations have their basic uh, soil test, and so they have applied phosphorus during seeding.
Perfect. And then you have the early versus late seeding dates compared. How was the early seeding date picked? Was it based off like the soil temperature to make sure it was that optimal 10 degrees? Or how did you go between those two dates?
So we picked up, so that's the second reason we want to see. Some of those sites don't have 10 degrees Celsius like Yorkton. So in 2025, the early seeding date, they have a soil temperature of 7.9 degrees Celsius. So we want to see like where we can push our early seeding date for seeding the soybean, these new varieties.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And we have one last question for you. So you're mentioning that soybeans aren't a host for Phenomyces. Are there any other pulses that are not a host of root rot?
I don't think I have that right answer for that, but I believe there is maybe the ribene is not considered as yeah. So I don't have answer to that question.
All good. I think faba beans in the north, I'm not sure if they're not as susceptible or if they're just not a host crop, but I think that might be an option for those a little further north.
Okay.
But that's a whole presentation in itself for what kind of conditions you need for faba beans. Awesome.
Yes, yeah. So main reason is like we want to consider soybean among those soils that has more of phenomyces, and they cannot grow peas and lentils over there. So this soybean is a option for the farmers to include this in a crop rotation.
Yeah, and especially down in your area, like a hop, skip, and a jump, you're into Manitoba, and they do a ton of soybeans. So
Yes,
I think it definitely is a viable option.
So yeah, so that's why we consider all 8 locations, and we seeded soybean further north to seed effect. And all the report has been submitted to Saskatchewan Pulse Growers, and I think the full report will be available soon from Saskatchewan Pulse Growers site.
Perfect. Awesome. We'll be able to check it out on their website then. And I think their website is listed in our resources handout that's attached to the webinar, so you folks can check that out after. But I think that is our last question here this morning for you. So thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to hop on with our next presenter.
And sorry for my voice. I had a sore throat in the morning, so
don't worry. I feel like there's all sorts of flus going around. So the fact that you're here, we're just happy for that.
Yeah,
thank you for joining us. Alrighty, and next up, we are going to hear from Chris Hosapple, and he is from the Indian Head Agriculture Research Foundation. I always just say AgriARM, so I don't get to say that whole thing out loud often, but they are from around Indian Head. So Chris, we'll get you to join us.
There we go. Should be good, and I assume I'm coming in loud and clear. So
yep, I can see you, hear you, and see your presentation. So you're good to go.
Right on. All right. Well, today I'm going to, I guess, give a bit of a preview of some newer work that we've got underway. It involves most of the AgriARM sites. Actually, 7 out of 8 of us are running these ones, and it was really initiated by SAS Pulse. I guess some of their agronomy staff and directors pushed forward this, trying to manage lodging, improve harvestability. So really, I guess what we're after is just very much exploratory, looking for potential benefits of current plant growth regulator products on pulse crops in Saskatchewan. So I will just kind of roll into it. In terms of what are PGRs, I assume that probably most of our audience knows this, but essentially by definition, they're just really any substance that is used for controlling or modifying plant growth processes without inducing severe toxicity. These really kind of can fall into two categories. We've got actually growth promoters. Some of the biostimulants might fall into this. That gets a little bit murky, but these are things that are designed to or intended to enhance growth, regulated through the Fertilizer Act, easier to push through, and really not what we're talking about today. When we get into products that actually limit growth, in many cases, we're trying to reduce height, prevent lodging, things like that. And these are actually regulated through the Pest Control Products Act, so very similar to herbicides and a little bit more of an intensive process. The reason for that is because I think we really do need to prove a lack of harm with some of these products because they are actually limiting as opposed to promoting growth. In terms of, I guess, some of the classes that are exist in Western Canada, first we have the ethylene releasing products, which probably most people wouldn't have as much experience with them. They're used very widely in horticulture, really for kind of uniform promoting ripening, helping harvestability of lots of berries and fruits, things like that. Also used in cereal production, but it's been a limited market, more probably in the seed market, and it can be a little bit, I guess, dicey to work with. If you get off label, you have a bit, or off stage, you have a much bigger chance of hurting the crop. What we're working with here, and I think what most people would have more experience with, are your gibberellin inhibitors. And the two products that most people would be recognizing would be Manipulator and Modus. There are some others, but not necessarily registered in Western Canada. When it comes to cereals, these do have a wider window of application, really intended to reduce stem elongation, shorten the crop, improving, I guess, reducing the amount of biomass you have to push through the combine, and also reducing lodging. When it comes to use in broadleaf crops and plants, it's a little bit less common, certainly not something we've done in Western Canada, but there are precedents. There's been some work looking at this to reduce scab in apple trees, suppressing vertical growth in ornamental peppers, which would be similar to what we maybe would want to do with our pulse crops, and also reducing height in red clover seed crops, which has proven effective. In terms of some of our more traditional pulse crops, there is some work done that Sherry Stridehorst and some of her colleagues did in Alberta several years back. They tested ethyl, Manipulator, and Modus with field peas, along with some stubble heights, inter-row seeding, things like that, to see how the crops would respond. And basically, they found that responses were somewhat inconsistent, varied a little bit from cultivar to cultivar, so maybe creating some more questions there. And also, importantly, I guess that they did induce a little bit of yield loss under dry conditions sometimes, so a bit of a word of caution. To our knowledge, no testing of these PGR products, or really any like this, growth inhibiting PGR products, has been done with chickpeas, faba beans, or lentils in Western Canada. And I guess big red flag caveat here, none of these products are registered for use in commercial production of pulse crops currently. So just bear that in mind. This really is an exploration of what we might consider doing going forward. So some of the treatments, I guess, or description of the work that we did. We're going to be running this in both 2025. We did run it, and we'll do it again next year. We're working with chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, and field peas. Our locations are Indian Head. We're the lead site. We're growing all 4 crops: chickpeas, fabas, lentils, field peas. Melfort is growing all 4 crops. Outlook is growing all 4 crops. Prince Albert was growing, they did initially grow all 4 crops, but they abandoned the chickpeas, and we probably will leave that out next year. They just didn't quite mature and do so well. Scott was doing all 4 crops, and Swift Current was doing everything except for the faba beans. We have worked with faba beans a little bit in Swift Current, but it tends to be just a little too dry, and lodging doesn't tend to be an issue, so we didn't go there. In terms of our treatments, very simple trial design. For each crop, we've got a separate trial, and we've got 4 treatments. An untreated control, TXP is our Trinexapac ethyl or Modus. CC is our chlormequat chloride or Manipulator. And then we've got a tank mix where both of these products go down in a mix together in the same application at half rates. There is some precedent for this as well. They're both gibberellin inhibitors, but they work on separate parts of the pathways. So sometimes we see some synergies to actually using both of them together and getting more effective control than either product on their own. The rates are based on barley application rates, which for manipulator in particular are a little bit higher than for wheat, but we just had to start somewhere. So I guess if we see efficacy, there might be some work in dialing this in. Data collection, whole bunch of stuff that I don't think I need to read, because actually I do present more or less everything that we've connected here, and we'll go through the slides fairly quickly when we get to that point. In terms of application timing, we were basically targeting, we specified 8 to 10 nodes for each crop, but really what we're looking for is to kind of be at that later vegetative stage where, similar to cereals, we've kind of got the crops well established and just kind of prior to where you see a lot of your stem elongation, growth, more vegetative production. So this is actually, we did measure days to flower as well, and this is kind of a busy slide, but it just shows for all crops and all sites kind of when we applied the PGRs and where that fell relative to the initiation of flowering. So basically we are anywhere from 6 to 21 days prior to flowering, depending on the crop and the location. And this really fell, kind of from into the second week of June, about June 11th, I think was our earliest date, right to July 1st was our latest. Some of this also came with differences in seeding dates, because some of our sites did seed quite a bit later than others. So really, it's pretty similar timing in terms of the calendar date is what we'd be looking at for cereals a lot of times. So first crop, I guess we'll roll through some of our results with chickpeas. Fairly new crop, I think, for many of us in the province. Swift Current, of course, they've been growing them for years, but with some of the challenges with root disease, things like that Anmal was talking about, there is interest in expanding this crop to different areas, and I think we've had a fair bit of success for some of the growers who have been brave enough to do so. I've kind of played around with this a few times and know that they can either do really well in our area or quite poorly. So I would still consider it a risky crop for a lot of these areas. Just a little side note, we weren't really too worried about how well the crops were adapted to any given area. We did want to maybe push this into environments that were a little bit more marginal, see more potential for heavy vegetative growth, lodging, things like that. So, but it does make for potentially some more challenging data, I guess, when we get into some of those tougher areas. So chickpea plant height. This is just at this stage, I've just analyzed every site individually, and we can see at Indian Head here. Oh, got ahead of myself. I thought I had my pointer option to look like a laser pointer, but it doesn't. So at Indian Head with chickpeas, we actually did reduce height with both the Modus or Trinexapac. That's our red bars. Every site will look, or every graph will look the same, where gray is our untreated control, that orange or red is Modus, the blue is manipulator, and the purple's our tank mix. So with Modus was actually our most effective product at Indian Head for reducing height. Didn't see much effect of manipulator on its own, and then kind of intermediate values with that tank mix. The difference was subtle, but it was statistically significant. For some of the other sites, you can see that they're all A's, which means we don't have statistical significance, but we did have, I think some trends that might become important later on as we do more powerful statistical analysis and get more data compiled. For example, when I look at Scott and Swift Current in particular, we see very much the same patterns for height reductions that we do at Indian Head. Just the variability was a little bit higher and it wasn't quite significant. So that may change going forward. When it came to lodging, at Indian Head, I really didn't see anything that I would call substantial lodging. They are kind of a well-branched plant with a little bit of a lean, so I was hesitant to call anything 0. We're on a scale of 0 to 9 here, but I just gave everything across the board just a flat rating of 1. Some of the sites, Scott and Swift Current, are drier locations, at least this year, basically said 0 across the board, no lodging whatsoever. Melford had a lot of lodging, but really no impacts of those PGRs. If you recall, they didn't affect height either at that location. Outlook had, I guess, more moderate lodging and some statistical variation there, but not really the results we're looking for. We actually have, for whatever reason, more lodging with manipulator than we do with the untreated control, and then the mix was comparable to the untreated control. So nothing that would indicate that we're actually reducing lodging at this site. In terms of seed yield, you can see a range here, and I think just that's interesting in itself for this crop for any growers who are dabbling. You can see at Indian Head, it was certainly one of our years where I would say they were a resounding success. We were 4,500 pounds per acre, or almost 75 bushels per acre is what that works out to. No impact of the PGRs on yield, so I guess that's good. Our experience with cereals will tell us that we consistently reduce height. When lodging occurs, we're usually quite effectively managing that lodging with PGRs, but yield improvements are never guaranteed with an input like this. It's something that certainly can happen when you're, I guess, preventing the lodging that often robs us of some yield. If it really improves harvestability, things like that, some growers may see value in a product like this, regardless of the impacts for yield. Melfort, more intermediate yields, Scott and Swift Current as well, no impacts of those PGRs, so that it is what it is, not a bad thing necessarily. There was no lodging, or relatively little lodging, and that I shouldn't say that Melfort did have lodging, but we didn't protect it, but no impacts on yield. Outlook, where our lowest yields were, and so I guess maybe some a little bit more challenging growing conditions for whatever reason, they actually did see a significant yield reduction with some of these treatments. So look, all of the treatments trended that way, but our Modus in that tank mix were actually significantly lower than the control. So some caution, I guess, is advised there. Looked at 1,000 seed weight or 1,000 kernel weight, we call it with cereals typically, and basically across the board here, you can see we had no impacts on that variable with the PGR. So that's okay. No improvements, which we don't necessarily expect, but importantly, we're not necessarily doing harm for that yield component. With chickpeas, seed diameter or over the overall seed size is also important. So we did want to take a look at that and just make sure that we weren't having some negative impacts there. We had one case actually in Indian Head where we did have some statistical significance, but take that with a big grain of salt. I think once I go in with some data transformations and combine this with other sites, that's going to disappear because it's agronomically totally unimportant. It just, the data was consistent enough that it ended up being significant. Outlook, Scott and Swift Current, no impacts of PGR. Melfort didn't use the right sieve, so we don't actually have that variable for their site, but we'll get that next year. This is just some different sizes. So that past slide was greater than 7 mils. Here's greater than 8 mils. No differences across the board. Greater than 9 mils. These are the real big ones. Again, no significant differences. Maybe some trends popping up at some sites, looking at Scott in particular, but the variability was too high that we couldn't call that significant. Moving on to faba beans. So this is a crop that's generally more well adapted to the wetter areas of the province, especially, the northeast, more northern areas. Indian Head, we tend to be in kind of a fringe area where sometimes they do quite well, sometimes not so much if it's hot and dry. But just looking at heights across the board, we see mostly a whole bunch of A's indicating not much impact, with the exception of manipulator at Melfort, where we did see a significant reduction. The other products didn't seem to help us much there. So not having a lot of impact on plant height for faba beans. When it came to lodging, some more intermediate values here. I guess I'll look at Indian Head first, the site I looked after. And I couldn't actually see this with the naked eye. Nothing was apparent, but when I went in and did the ratings, and analyzed the data, it did look like maybe a very modest but significant reduction in lodging, with our Modus was a little bit more, the manipulator was a little bit more effective than the Modus, and then that mix was most effective. So it's subtle, but was significant. Outlook, no difference. Prince Albert, a fair bit of variation there, but no difference. Scott, no impact. Yorkton, no impact. When it came to seed yields, so Indian Head was the site where we actually did have some impacts on lodging, subtle as they may be, and actually this was surprising to me, but we actually do have some significant yield increases. Again, I think these might disappear once I combine the data, but our plots were very consistent at Indian Head, so it did turn out to be significant, even though it's only really a couple bushels per acre is kind of all we were seeing with each of those products applied on their own relative to the control. But I'm not going to get too excited about that just because it is so small. For the other sites, really no impacts on seed yield across the board there for faba beans. I will say that, some of these sites, we see Prince Albert, Yorkton, some very high variability. once it comes time for the final analyses and combining this across locations, we will likely have to exclude some data points or sites just to clean things up a little bit. Fabamine TKWs, no effects, positive or negative there across the board. We do see some pretty high variability at some sites, but all in all, no concerns. We also looked at protein with our fabamines, and mostly no impacts, with the exception of Scott. And I struggled to wrap my head around this one a little bit. There were no impacts on yield and really no trends either that were consistent with the variation in protein that we did see, but it is statistically significant. I guess the good news is we're never actually reducing protein with the PGRs at that location. You know, all of the differences were positive when they were significant. And, just for consistency with this as well, we did actually do all the proteins all at one location. We ran these at Indian Head through our NIR machine just to make sure that equipment wasn't causing any variation there across sites. Moving on to lentils. So when it came to plant heights, we've got most of our locations, so 5 out of 6, really no impact of the PGR on plant height there. Some variation just with environments. Outlook was a weird one, and I think this will end up having to be removed, where we had very high variability and really the opposite trends of what we would expect. You know, and if that was a little bit of a cleaner response, I would put a little more weight into that observation, but the reality is that the data were just kind of all over the map and it wasn't significant. Melfort, on the other hand, though, we actually did have some nice consistent height data, and for the most part, pretty consistent reductions in that lentil height with PGR. One might have to ask themselves, do you actually want to make your lentils shorter? And that's certainly something I think about that. You know, improved standability is certainly something that is of great value with lentils. They're not the easiest crop to harvest, but we don't necessarily want them shorter. So that's just, you know, I guess take it for what it is. But it did look like at that location, all products were having a subtle but consistent and significant benefit. When it came to lodging, really no differences there, despite a lot of variation across the sites. So Scott and Swift Current essentially reported no lodging whatsoever. Same with Melfort to a large extent. Things were more variable at Melfort, but so small that, you know, that's of no concern to me. And you know, I would basically call that no lodging. Indian Head really just kind of the slightest lean to the crop, if you will. Nice lentils this year. They stood very well. No impact of PGRs. Outlook and Prince Albert both did report higher degrees of lodging, but for neither of those did we actually see any benefit to the PGRs. When it came to yields, excellent year at our location, probably some of the best lentils I've ever seen in my time at that site, but no impact of PGR on the yields. So that's good, I suppose. And really right across the board, we see that there were no significant impacts of the PGRs on lentil yields. Again, some sites are pretty variable and might not make the final cut for final analyses, but at this stage, I'm just laying it all out for you guys. Seed weight, we do have one responsive site, and that ended up being Melfort. Very low variability at this site, and you know, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is likely going to have much impact on yield or grading, anything like that. But the good news is that any impacts that the PGR did have, inconsistent as they may be across environments, were positive. They actually improved seed size or seed weight relative to the control. So that's good news. Moving on to field peas. I think I'm finishing up with probably some extra time, but that's okay. We're not quite there yet, and I'd rather be a little bit early than too late. Maybe have some questions. So looking at field pea plant height, this is the one we do have some precedent for. So they did do some work in Alberta here and did see some reductions, just maybe not with the consistency that they would like to see to really make some recommendations that this could have value. You know, field peas, I don't think that some of the older varieties certainly can be quite tall. Breeding has gone a long way in terms of improving overall standability. But if, you know, there may be some merit to this if we can, you know, maybe shrink up some of those taller varieties, but more importantly, just improve standability. And we do see, in fact, that at this location, 2 out of our 6 sites, or 7 sites, sorry, we were significantly reducing plant height with the PGRs. At Indian Head, all of the products performed reasonably consistently. We actually had the best results with the tank mix, more intermediate with Modus on its own, which tells me that that's probably doing the heavy lifting, and then not quite as much effect with the manipulator. But all were better than the control, and really were pretty consistent. None of them significantly differed from one another. Those trends were consistent with our other responsive site, which was Melfort. So we see the untreated control did not significantly differ from manipulator, but there's a trend for shorter plants, and then both our Modus and our tank mix did significantly reduce height. And as we go across the board, you know, we see maybe a little bit higher variability that prevented these from becoming significant. But you know, I think some of these trends are consistent and important enough that they might pop out as we get a little bit more powerful analysis down the road once we have more data. When it came to lodging, we've got some variation here, but I guess no instances where we did improve lodging with the PGR. Melfort reported a fair degree of lodging, but a lot of variability. So, you know, probably more just variation over the trial area as a whole than from one treatment to the next. Indian Head, things were standing quite well, and really no trends one way or another, and no meaningful trends, I would say, kind of across the board, at least none that I can take too seriously based on the variability. In terms of yields, really nice yields at many of the sites here this year, and no impacts of PGR on seed yield. So that's good. Even in the cases where we were reducing height, we didn't hurt the yield. Seed weight, no impacts there either. Seed protein, we measured that at Indian Head again, similar to the faba beans. No impacts of the PGR on protein. So just, I guess, some final concluding messages here. So all of our results are preliminary at this time. So just, you know, I present this more as a preview and something to make you aware of that the work is being done. Keep an eye out for things around this time next year, and hopefully we have some more concrete messages. We will be excluding some data from the final combined analysis just due to unusual variability and maybe that not being reliable. PGR significantly reduced height at 1 of 5 sites for chickpea, 1 of 6 sites for faba bean, 1 of 6 sites for lentil, and 2 of 6 sites for field peas. So occasionally, but not with great consistency. General tendency for Indian Head and Melfort to be the most responsive sites, and for Trinexapac or Modus to be a little bit more effective than manipulator. Some of the trends we see might become significant with combined analysis. I've said that a couple times. Lodging varied widely by location and crop, but was only reduced in 1 out of 23 possible cases. That was the very subtle difference we saw with faba beans at Indian Head. So PGR affected seed yields in 2 of 3 possible instances. 1 of those was negative. That was our chickpeas at Outlook under very stressful, low yielding conditions. And then a very slight positive response for the faba beans at Indian Head. Again, nothing I got too excited about there. It was statistically significant, but it was small and probably wouldn't even cover the cost of application in the product. I should mention that this application probably is going to be a standalone application. It's going to be a little bit too late to mix with our herbicides for pulse crops. You know, when working with most of our herbicides in these crops, we do need to get in quite early, and it's certainly going to be too early to tank mix with a fungicide. So if you are going to commit, you're looking at another pass with the sprayer, which will probably turn some people off right out of the gate. No negative impacts on any of the quality parameters measured. Any positive impacts were small, but we did have a couple, and that was a slight increase in seed weight at Melfort with the lentils, and faba bean protein with a couple treatments at Scott. So results to date, to me, when I look at the big picture, say that the PGR treatments evaluated are probably fairly unlikely to provide meaningful benefits with any of the crops we've tested. But again, we will be repeating all these trials in 2026, and it is possible that will change, but that is where I'm leaning at this stage. And that's a wrap. I guess if anyone has questions, we'll address what we can here. And there's my contact info. I'm always happy to get phone calls or emails, and yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Alrighty, I have a question. I think your last line kind of addressed it there, but I still want to ask it just to get your thoughts. So of course, with the PGRs not being registered on pulses, this is an exploratory experiment at this point.
Yeah.
but what potential do you see here? Where is the value for the producer if it were to become registered in the future? And what crops do you think it would be most useful for?
I think the ones where we have the most biomass to deal with would maybe be your field peas, but like I said, the varieties I think have come a long way, at least for our yellow field peas that we're working with. If we start maybe getting into some of our maples and some of these other crop types that do tend to lodge more and don't have that standability, maybe we see some more value there. But I think we'd have to see some more consistent responses here. When it comes to lentils, I think you have to be really careful what we wish for. We don't want them any shorter. And to me, a lot of the lodging, lodging can be an issue early on, especially in years where we have a lot of lush growth. But a lot of it sometimes comes with harvest challenges where maybe you get that crop sprayed, can't get out there and get it combined, or we start getting these August rains that just pound it into the ground. And I really don't see PGR saving you there. Faba beans can be a tricky one. They do have a lot of potential to lodge, but the stems kind of almost tend to break when they're very hollow, kind of fragile stems. And if you have a good crop, you get a lot of seed weight there, and they can get quite heavy. And in which case, I've seen fabas go down a lot. So that might be one, up in the Northeast where they consistently grow big crops, and maybe some more value there if we could see that benefit. They're not real, they go through the combine easily. I'll say that. But if anything's flat, it's a little tougher. Chickpeas, I struggle with a little bit. I don't have that much firsthand experience, but I do know that in some environments, especially when it's wetter, they can get quite tall. So maybe some value there. But I think across the board, I'm looking a lot closer at variety selection and good harvest management, things like that, versus PGRs in some of these crops. But we'll keep an open mind, and like you say, we can't use them right now. So if we saw enough merit in this work, the next step would be to maybe pursue some minor use registrations or go after the chem companies to try to actually make that something we can do. But at this stage, we've got another year, so I don't want to get ahead of myself. But based on what I've shown today and kind of looked at so far, I wouldn't be pursuing that registration.
Awesome. Alrighty, thank you so much, Chris. In the interest of time here, I think we're going to head on to our next presentation. But thank you for joining us this morning. Always appreciate your perspective.
Cool.
Alrighty, so next up we have Aquiel Thorlickson. I should know how to pronounce your last name, Aquiel. My apologies. I get to work with her out of the Prince Albert area, and she comes from the Conservation Learning Center. So with that, I will hand the reins over to you, Aquiel.
Great, thank you, Ellie. You can see and hear me and see my presentation?
Everything looks good.
Perfect. Okay, so like Ellie said, my name is Aquiel, and I'm the research associate here at the Conservation Learning Center. We're located about 18 kilometers south of Prince Albert. And the update I have for you today is on our trial titled Winter Cereal Demonstration, showcasing winter wheat, winter triticale, and fall rye. So winter cereals can be an advantageous crop to grow for producers because compared to their summer counterparts, they often have better yield potential because of the longer growing season. They can provide a better quality forage crop that is ready to be cut or grazed sooner. They make more efficient use of late fall and early spring moisture. They're often better weed competitors. And due to that early season development, winter cereal crops often miss peak infection windows of several detrimental diseases and pests. One of the biggest challenges associated with winter cereals in Saskatchewan, though, is winter mortality, and that's why they may not be such a common crop here. So that's one of the main reasons we wanted to do this demonstration. So the overall objective was, of course, to showcase winter cereals, but further, we wanted to compare how a delayed seeding date can affect winter survivability and yield potential of winter cereals. As well, we wanted to demonstrate how different varieties of winter cereals perform in different regions of the province. And then, of course, the idea is to promote the adoption of winter cereals within Saskatchewan. So this project was set up in a split plot design to facilitate seeding, crop protection, and harvest. We had seeding date as the main plot with crop type and variety as these subplots. Our seeding dates were at an optimal and delayed timing. So for the optimal time, each site followed the local recommended rate for their area or date for their area. These recommendations for timing of winter cereals on the prairies has been very well established, and essentially you just want 3 leaves or 1 tiller prior to frost. The delayed seeding date occurred about 2 weeks after the first, and this delay was intended to represent a scenario where harvest of the previous crop is quite delayed, or a producer gets too busy with harvest to seed their winter cereals at the optimal time. And this 2-week delay should be enough to decrease the winter survivability of the crop, but not so long as to lead to catastrophic losses. At about 6 weeks of a delay is where we would start to see issues arise, like winter kill, increased weed competition, late heading and maturity, yield losses, and lower test weights. So within this trial, we looked at 3 crop types. We had winter wheat, winter triticale, and fall rye. And then within each crop type, we examined a more commonly grown variety and a newer one that producers may be less familiar with. So for the following varieties, the first one listed is the more common one, and the second is the newer variety, and they'll be listed this way throughout the entire presentation, just for a point of reference. So for winter wheat, we had AEC Wildfire and AEC Cold Front. For winter triticale, we had Fridge and AB Snowcat. And then for fall rye, we looked at Hazlet and KWS Trebbiano. So this trial took place at Melfort, Outlook, Prince Albert, and Swift Current. The plots were seeded in the fall of 2024 and then harvested in summer 2025. They were all seeded into stubble to ensure proper snow trapping. Fertility was applied to be non-limiting, and at a minimum, phosphorus was applied at time of seeding to promote that root and crown development. And other nutrients were either applied at seeding or as early as possible in the spring. Seeding rates for each site followed local recommended rates and were adjusted for 1,000 kernel weight and germination. At Prince Albert, for example, we had target plant stands of 300 plants per meter square, and fall rye was seeded with a target of 300 plants per meter square. So a little bit about the growing season. Summer 2024 was quite hot and dry for all sites, but thankfully there was some late precipitation that helped get these winter cereals established before the first killing frost. Over the winter, there was pretty good snow cover at Melfort, Outlook, and Prince Albert, but unfortunately in Swift Current, they experienced a lot of blowing and drifting snow, which left a lot of their fields bare. Throughout the 2025 growing season, all sites were warmer or similar to their average temperatures. And then for precipitation, Melfort, Outlook, and Swift Current received close to or above their long-term average precipitation. Irrigation and Outlook provided an additional 6 inches of water across June and July. But in Prince Albert, we received only about 78% of our average precipitation, and the majority of it we received over the course of 1.5 weeks in late June. And so this delayed precipitation at some of the other sites as well resulted in second growth in all of our winter cereals that made staging challenging and delayed our harvest. For our data collection, in 2024, before seeding, we conducted a basic soil test to determine fertility rates. And then after crop emergence, we did plant counts and recorded the crop stage at the first killing frost, which would be about around -4 degrees Celsius. And then in 2025, again, we did plant density, and then we also looked at lodging, days to maturity, grain yield, and test weight. So now into some of that data. The winter cereals were all successfully established at all sites prior to freeze up. Surprisingly though, plant densities were significantly higher when seeding was delayed in all but Swift Current, where there was no difference. But at most sites, there was no precipitation until after the second seeding date, which may explain the improved plant stands with delayed seeding. Winter cereal crop type and variety had a strong influence on plant stands. Fall rye is generally seeded at a lower rate than winter wheat and winter triticale due to differences in winter hardiness. So in the fall of 2024, we would expect to see lower plant densities of fall rye than the other 2 crops, which is indeed more or less the trend that was observed at all sites. So this is not showing or saying that fall rye had worse establishment. It is purposely lower than the other 2 crops. There was a few varietal differences in fall emergence across the sites. Winter triticale Fridge had greater emergence than the newer variety AB Snowcat in Melfort, Outlook, and Prince Albert. Then in Swift Current, the Hazlet fall rye had greater emergence than the newer variety KWS Trebbiano. And then the 2 winter wheat varieties essentially performed the same across all sites. So the plant stand differences in fall 2024 did not translate into differences in the spring. In 2025, just to clarify, plant densities were determined by plant counts in Swift Current, but if the crop was too far in advance, percent coverage was recorded instead, like we did at Melfort and Prince Albert, and this data was not collected at Outlook. So overall, winter survivability of all the crops and varieties was pretty good for all the sites. In Melfort, there was no differences in percent cover. In Prince Albert, winter triticale coverage did not differ significantly from fall rye like it did in the fall. And the winter wheats had the least coverage, but were not all that different statistically speaking. In Swift Current, the AB snowcat winter triticale retained that statistical significant plant density advantage over both varieties of fall rye, but otherwise the plant densities were fairly similar for all crop types and varieties. Now looking at lodging, there was none in Prince Albert or Swift Current. These plants were likely stressed by the lack of moisture and therefore stunted. Our lodging was rated on a scale of 1 to 9, where 1 meant the crop was completely upright and 9 where the crop was completely flattened. So both sites didn't have that bad of lodging. Melfort's was slightly more lodged, but that's because the area experienced winds up to 95 kilometers per hour in August. Yeah, overall, we didn't see an effect of seeding date on lodging, only from crop type. And here we just saw that lodging was greater in the winter triticale and fall rye than it was in the winter wheat. Looking at the days to maturity, there was indeed differences in seeding date, or the differences in seeding date had an effect on days to maturity. So the earlier seeded crops matured earlier than the delayed crops, with the difference in days aligning almost perfectly with the period of time between seeding dates. So the difference between days to maturity of seeding dates was 14, 11, 19, and 27. And then the days between seeding dates were 14, 12, 19, and 30 for Melfort, Outlook, Prince Albert, and Swift Current, respectively. Otherwise, the differences in maturity was mostly between crop type rather than the varieties. In Melfort, winter triticale matured 3 days later than winter wheat and fall rye. In Outlook, all crops matured at relatively the same time. And in Prince Albert, fall rye matured 5 days earlier than winter wheat and winter triticale. And then in Swift Current, we saw no differences. Now looking at our yields, seeding date had no effect on yield in Prince Albert and Melfort, but did in Swift Current and Outlook. And although yields were extremely poor in Swift Current this year, the earlier seeded winter cereals still had double the yield. And at both sites, earlier seeded winter cereals yielded 7.2 bushels per acre better. As expected, yields differed between crop types and varieties across all sites. In Melfort, KWS Trebbiano fall rye was the highest yielding and yielded 18.6 bushels per acre, better than the more commonly grown hazelet. And here, AAC cold front winter wheat was the lowest yielding. In Outlook, KWS Trebbiano was also the greatest yielding. For winter wheat, the newer variety AAC cold front yielded less than the commonly grown AAC wildfire. And for winter triticale, the newer AB snowcat yielded 13.6 bushels per acre more than fridge. And then again here, AAC cold front is the lowest yielding. In Prince Albert and Swift Current, we saw no difference between varieties, only crop type. So in Prince Albert, the winter triticale out-yielded winter wheat and fall rye, but then in Swift Current, both winter triticale and fall rye out-yielded the winter wheat. Now looking at test weights, it was very location dependent, as most of the results sort of have been so far. In Melfort and Outlook, we saw that delayed seeding resulted in slightly higher test weights in the winter triticale and winter wheat varieties respectively. There was no difference in seeding date for test weights at Prince Albert, and all varieties and crop types experienced reduced test weights with delayed seeding in Swift Current. Now looking at crop type, in Melfort and Swift Current, test weights were higher in the more commonly grown winter triticale and fall rye varieties compared to their newer showcased varieties, but for the winter wheat and Swift Current, the newer variety Wildfire had the higher test weight. In Outlook, a higher test weight was observed in the more commonly grown fridge winter triticale, and in PA, the only difference was that the fall rye, where the newer KWS Trebbiano had the higher test weight. So in conclusion, all 3 winter crops can successfully overwinter throughout the province. It's hard to make any generalizations because of how different each site performed, especially with Prince Albert and Swift Current not reaching their full yield potentials, but there are some things we can draw conclusions on. So while the optimal seeding date would be the wise recommendation to follow and resulted in increased yields in Swift Current and Outlook, it is indeed feasible to seed later and still get good yields. The fall rye was earlier maturing, and the winter triticale wood is the latest. At some sites, newer varieties out-yielded the more commonly grown varieties, such as KWS Trebbiano Fall Rye in Melford and Outlook, and AB Snowcat Winter Triticale in Outlook. Winter wheat experienced the least lodging, but it was the poorest yielding and had the lowest test weights. And also test weights were often lower in the newer varieties. But all of that is to say that winter cereals can be a promising option for the producers of Saskatchewan. So that is it for me. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you prefer, you can take down our contact information and reach out at any time.
Awesome, thank you, Aquel. So we have a couple questions here. First off, was the harvest date for the winter cereals earlier than the harvest dates for the spring seeded cereals in all locations?
I don't know about all locations. For us, it was pretty similar to our spring crops, just because of how delayed our winter cereals were. Like, they were so green for so long, and so it unfortunately was pretty comparable to our spring crops this year.
Perfect. And then my other question for you is, with the winter cereals, if a person adopts them on farm, what benefits do you think they're getting from that? Because I was wondering, did you guys like do any weed counts or that kind of thing? Because maybe you're getting a bit of.
Right. Yeah. So that's a question we've had a few times now, is which one was better for weed control. And that's not something that we looked at in this trial, so I can't say for sure which one is better, only anecdotally, like being in there doing the hand weeding. But even then, I don't remember. We had some pretty bad thistles this year. So on weed control, at least, I can't answer that, unfortunately.
That's so fair. Awesome.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning. And with that, we're going to hop on to our next presenter. So we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So next up, we have Amber Wall from the Wheatland Conservation Area, and they are located near Swift Current, Saskatchewan.
Hi.
All right, I can hear you and see you, and your presentation is good to go.
Perfect. So today I'll be sharing the final results from a 3-year study looking at nitrogen and seeding rate recommendations for composite yellow mustard production in Saskatchewan, with a focus on how the composite variety AAC Yellow 80 compares to the open pollinated Andante. This is a strategic field program project that ran from 2023 to 2025. So it's conducted in collaboration with the Government of Canada under the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership, Federal, Provincial, Territorial Initiative, and the Saskatchewan Mustard Development Commission as well. I'd also like to acknowledge the collaborators and summer students who contributed to this work, who are part of the AgriARM network, specifically our staff here at Wheatland Conservation Area and Swift Current, the Indian Head Agricultural Research Foundation, and the Southeast Research Farm at Redverse. This, of course, worked extremely well to develop these multi-site, multi-year projects, with these locations being located throughout the province, covering the variety of different soil zones. And it's really nice to have these 3 years of data. The reason this work is important is because this composite mustard, relatively new, became commercially available in 2021 in small amounts, more so in 2022. And previous fertility and seeding rate recommendations were based on open pollinated types. So as more growers adopt new varieties, we need solid Saskatchewan-based data to support those fertility and management decisions. We had 2 main objectives. First, to understand how nitrogen requirements and yield response differ between AAC Yellow 80 and Andante. Second, to identify seeding rates that maximize yield, as we do want to keep those seed costs in mind. Ultimately, this work is about fine-tuning those inputs so growers can protect profitability while managing risk. We had a randomized complete block design with 4 replicates and the 2 varieties, as mentioned. A little background on basic information and conditions. Nitrogen is the nutrient required in the greatest quantity by mustard, and because uptake occurs throughout the entire growing cycle, the environment that these trials were in is very important to the nitrogen response. So yield response to nitrogen is strongest when moisture is not limiting, which is particularly relevant in this study, especially in the southwest corner of Saskatchewan. So a couple different things collected. We've got plant density, plant height, lodging. We noted differences in days to maturity, collected seed yield, and of course, want to take into consideration the weather and soil. So to start off each year, we took a composite soil sample of the area and submitted for residual nutrients and basic quality analysis. We did have the odd site year with fairly high residual nitrogen, but generally a decent test area. Some medium to high phosphorus and sulfur levels, low to medium micronutrient levels, and then different organic matter across locations. Of course, Swift Current having low organic matter, about 2.5% in the dry brown soil zone, followed by Redverse with 3 to 4% in a dark gray soil zone, and the highest organic matter at Indian Head, about 4 to 6% in the black soil zone there. So certainly different soil types, and which will create a possible different response to nitrogen. In terms of the general growing season conditions, at Swift Current in 2023, unfortunately, we had a pretty good hailstorm that caused about 20% yield loss, but generally hot and dry across all site years. In 2025, we did have some late season precipitation that certainly helped yield-wise, but made for a bit of a delayed and long harvest. As you can see, that blue line 2025, it just jumps over the long-term average there after July. Overall, weed and insect pressure were low. We did have this rate close to some brown mustard too, and the flea beetles seem to go more towards that than compared to the yellow. At Redverse, despite some dry conditions, that first year they had some decent soil residual moisture from the previous year. Lots of precipitation again in 2024, which they would have needed that residual moisture again this past season, as precipitation was below the long-term average again. Indian Head, a couple of generally dry years as well, and some harvest difficulties in 2024 due to some lodging. So we'll look at the seed rate trial first. We evaluated 5 seeding rates for both varieties at all locations. So treatments here are standardized by seeds per square meter or seeds per plants per square foot. Because of that varietal difference in seed size, I've got it converted into pounds per acre on the far side there, which can be calculated from the 1,000 seed weight. So emergence and plant stands. This was one of the most consistent results, was that Indante emerged better than AAC Yellow 80 across sites. So seeded at the same target plant stand, AAC Yellow 80 had a lower population, especially as seed rate increased. So higher mortality at higher seed rates for that AAC Yellow 80. And we also saw clear location effects here. Swift Current typically had the lowest emergence. Redverse was intermediate, and Indian Head consistently had the highest plant stand out of these 3 locations. So when we look at the yield and the variety and year effect across 3 sites, we'll start at Swift Current first. Variety effect here was strong. AAC Yellow 80 produced significantly higher mustard yield than Indante across all 3 site years. Yields in 2025 were significantly higher than the previous 2 years. And overall here, yield differences were driven by both variety and year, with that Yellow 80 and the 2025 season showing the strongest performance. So we can look at each seed rate closer. Firstly, notice those much better yields we had in 2025, that green line, for both varieties. And AAC Yellow 80 maxing out over 1,600 pounds per acre in 2025, about 32 bushels per acre. So we were pretty happy with that. Those highest yields occurred with the lower seed rates, about 108 to 150 seeds per square meter, and yield declined as seed rate increased. with that highest seed rate, the 280 seeds per square meter, significantly lower yielding pretty consistently every year, regardless if or when the moisture came or not. Andante yield was also highest at the lowest seed rate, 108 seeds per square meter, and steadily decreased as seed rate increased. Our highest yields there averaging 1,100 pounds per acre. So overall for both varieties, those higher seed rates did not increase yield, and optimum yields were achieved at the lower seed rates. Redverse, again, AAC Yellow 80 yielded significantly higher than Andante at Redverse 2 out of 3 years. This was not the case in 2023 when they were very similar. 2023 and 2025 were higher yielding yields, while 2024 was significantly lower. The seed rate effect at Redverse, AAC Yellow 80 yield was relatively stable across all seed rates. There was no significant yield response from 108 to 280 seeds per square meter in the combined year analysis, but this was not the case in 2025, where AAC Yellow 80 yielded 1,700 pounds per acre at those higher seed rates. Andante yield showed a slight decline at that highest seed rate, with the lowest seed rates performing as well or better than higher rates, and those results were more consistent than the AAC Yellow 80. Overall, increasing seed rate did not result in a yield advantage, but that site may be more suited to a moderate seed rate at Redverse. That could be due to just having a more ideal environment, minimize those effects of competition, or allowed the plants to compensate across those lower densities. Indian Head variety and year effect. AAC Yellow 80 yielded significantly higher than Andante at Indian Head. This was a bit confounding depending on the year, so that was true of 2 out of 3 years, not in 2025 where they were similar. 2025 was overall the highest yielding year, 2023 intermediate, and 2024 the lowest, so similar across locations. Mustard yield by seed rate. AAC Yellow 80 yield was highest at that lowest seed rate, 108 seeds per square meter, and declined as seeding rate increased, and in 2025 yielded 2,000 bushels or 2,000 pounds per acre. Andante yield was generally stable, slightly lower yielding at higher seed rates, no yield benefit from increasing seed rate, and Andante yielding over 1,900 pounds per acre in 2025. So overall, across all 3 locations, we did not see consistent yield increases with higher seed rates. In many cases, yield plateaued or even slightly declined as seeding rate increased. And this tells us that once a minimum effective plant stand is achieved, that these mustards are very capable of compensating through branching, pod set, maybe even increases seed size when there's less competition. And higher plant stands also increased in-crop competition for moisture, especially in drier environments. But you may want that to increase that in-crop competition for weeds. So kind of need to pick your battle there. Of course, we want to factor in the seed cost for those higher seed rates. Overall, these results suggest that seed rates toward the lower end of the current recommendations are likely sufficient, especially for that AAC Yellow 80. Shifting to the nitrogen trial, again, we've got our 2 varieties, and we're looking at 7 nitrogen rates ranging from soil nitrogen only up to 160 pounds of total nitrogen per acre. So important to note there that this is the total from the soil residual plus applied. So these treatments allowed us to characterize yield response curves under a wide range of environments. So nitrogen had little consistent effect on emergence, although it varied by location. However, Andante still resulted in higher emergence rates compared to AAC Yellow 80 as in the previous trial. Where nitrogen made a big difference was in seed yield. Across all sites, yield increased with nitrogen, but that optimal rate did vary by environment. So first off, at Swift Current, again, AAC Yellow 80 yielded significantly higher than Andante, and 2025 was our highest yielding year. AAC Yellow 80 yield increased steadily with added nitrogen, with the best response around that 120 to 140 pounds of N per acre. A little to no benefit was seen beyond that, and yield leveled off or even declined slightly when that 160 pounds of N per acre was applied. Andante yield also responded well to nitrogen, improving up to 100 to 140 total N per acre, then plateaued with no gain at that highest nitrogen rate. So good response to nitrogen at Swift Current, but rates above that 120 to 140 pounds of N per acre did not provide consistent yield benefits. And really the optimal nitrogen rate in 2025 was higher thanks to that late season precipitation, which we don't typically get. The 100 to 120 N was sufficient 2 out of 3 years. At Redverse, there was no significant yield difference between AAC Yellow 80 and Andante. However, that was only true 1 of 3 years. 2025 was the highest yielding, and 2024 was significantly lowest, so that did affect those results a little bit. Yield consistently increased with nitrogen. For AAC Yellow 80, the highest yields reaching that when 140 to 160 pounds of N per acre was applied. No clear plateau was reached and yielded over 1,500 pounds per acre in 2025. For Andante, yield also increased with nitrogen and tapered off around 120 to 160 pounds of N per acre, yielding 1,400 pounds per acre. So both mustard varieties show a strong, steady response to nitrogen, especially that AAC Yellow 80 in 2025, and the optimum N rates here appear to be a bit higher here compared to Swift Current, likely due to generally more moisture. At Indian Head, AAC Yellow 80 yielded significantly higher than Andante, and of course 2023 and 2025 higher yielding years. And the mustard yield response to nitrogen by treatment. Both varieties responded strongly to nitrogen. Yield increased steadily from soil N up to those highest rates, but the biggest gains did come from moving out of that low nitrogen, that soil N, to 60 to 100 pounds of N per acre, but yield continued to climb up to 140, even 160 pounds of N per acre, with no clear plateau at those highest rates. Overall, AC Yellow 80 generally demonstrated higher yield potential and better nitrogen use efficiency compared to Andante. Second, that optimal nitrogen rates were site specific, not necessarily by location, but based on the environment. In dry environments, 80 to 100 pounds of total N was often sufficient, so up to 120 if moisture was more adequate. In those adequate to high moisture environments, yield continued to increase from 120 up to even 160 pounds of total nitrogen, as we saw in this study. And lastly, higher seeding rates did not improve yield. We did collect that other data. So at Indian Head, for example, it did sometimes increase lodging. At Swift Current, plant mortality was higher and lots of competition for moisture. So this data suggests that composite yellow mustard can likely be seeded at lower rates compared to open pollinated types without sacrificing yield. And our final edition of this 2025 data strengthens our confidence in recommending that reduced seeding rate and site-specific nitrogen management for that composite yellow mustard. And again, as we've seen in the past, micronutrients and that background fertility matters. A composite soil test remains essential when making those fertility decisions. And if you want to see the full results, these will be on our website here pretty quick. I'd like to thank the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture for developing this project and contributing to extension efforts over the past couple of years. Saskatchewan Mustard Development Commission and M21, and all the staff and students for supporting this project. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Awesome. All right, Amber, we have a couple of questions that came in.
Okay.
So first off is, what is the typical yellow mustard seeding rate that Saskatchewan producers have been using?
I think they were I mean, it's kind of always just been like 8 to 10 pounds per acre, which of course doesn't consider your seed size. So if you go back and look at that seed chart here, that is almost kind of meaningless if you don't know your seed size. So that was the previous recommendations was for yellow mustard was 8 to 10 pounds per acre.
Awesome. Alrighty. Next up, a couple questions regarding economics. So is there increased seed cost with AAC Yellow 80, and does the increased yield make up for those costs?
Yeah, we didn't include that in the study. I don't even know the cost of the composite. I do believe does cost a little bit more than Andante, but I don't know those exact costs.
Okay, and then another economic one, but I'm not sure if you covered it like you said, is did you do economic analysis for the nitrogen rates on the mustard trials?
No, we didn't. We didn't include an economic analysis. I don't know. I think farmers know their numbers better than anyone else, so it doesn't necessarily, especially by year with nitrogen, how much nitrogen costs are changing. It's almost not relevant by the time you do it. So I hope farmers kind of have their own costs mapped out and can look at these yields and go from there.
Absolutely, and it seems like it's not even by year it's changing. The price changes by the week these days.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Alrighty, one last question for you is, can mustard plants compensate for uneven emergence similar to canola?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's why with the AAC Yellow 80 having that lower emergence, yet having that lower yield, I think that is a good testament to the genetics that have gone into developing new varieties. It's obviously branching out more and creating more pods and ultimately more seed that's getting us to those higher yields. So yeah, I think the lower the plant stand for mustard, the more branching to an extent, of course.
Perfect. Alrighty, so that is all the questions we have for you this morning. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your update today.
Thanks.
Okay, so with that, we will head into our next presentation, and we're going to have Vijay Singh join us from the Western Applied Research Corporation, and that is the research farm that is located near Scott, Saskatchewan. We had the pleasure of having a crop diagnostic school there last year, so perfect. Can see your screen. It's in presentation mode. Alrighty, it looks like your camera's not working, but can you talk?
Yeah.
Oh, there we
go. So can you see my notes here?
I can't see your notes. We can only see the presentation, so you're good to go.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So hello everyone. My name is Vijay Singh, and I'm a research associate with the Western Applied Research Corporation, located at Scott. And the topic of sorry, my bad. The topic of my presentation is phosphorus formulations and placement effects on field pea performance. So to start, I would like to give acknowledgement to all of the AgriARM sites included in the study, as well as the funders of the project. And I would like to thank Saskatchewan Pulse Growers. The project was led by Chris Halswell from IHARF, and he was the principal investigator. And the collaborators of the project were Northeast Agriculture Research Foundation, Western Applied Research Corporation, and Wheatland Conservation Area. So let's talk about the objectives of the study. The overall project objective of the study was to determine the agronomic response of the field pea to various phosphorus fertilizer formulations and placement options. We aim to explore whether the response to fertilizer forms differ depending on placement option and how the responses differ with the environment.
This was the overall objective, but the study had 4 detailed objectives. The first one is, does P response vary by phosphorus formulation with sideband placement? And the second one is, do emergence and yield vary by seed place for phosphorus formulation? The third is, does P establishment and yield response to side-banded versus seed-placed phosphorus differently by formulation? And the last is, how does adding a modest sulfur to MAP affect the P yield and seed row establishment versus MAP alone? It was a replicated small pot study, which was established in spring of 2025 at 4 Saskatchewan locations to see the result on different soil zones of Saskatchewan. The 4 sites are Indian Head, Melfort, Scott, and Swift Grant. Indian Head have thin black soil zone, while Melfort have moist black soil zone. Scott has dark brown soil zone, while Swift Grant has dry brown soil zone. Sorry. So let's talk about the treatments. There were 12 treatments, and it was replicated trial with the 4 reps. Treatment 1 had no fertilizer, as you can see, and treatment 2 only had nitrogen, but no phosphorus. We replied from treatment 3 to 12. The rate of phosphorus was held constant across the treatments at 45 kg P2O5 per hectare. Nitrogen was also balanced at 26 kgs per hectare, which was the amount of nitrogen provided by MAP and MAS in treatment 4 and treatment 9. Where applicable, the sulfur rate was 17 to 21 kgs per hectare. However, the forms of sulfur varied. Because the crystal green synchro does not include any sulfur, we side-banded 78 kgs AMS with the product to eliminate potential biases due to sulfur deficiencies. Let's talk about the agronomic details of the trial. All the plots were direct seeded into cereal stubble with the seeding dates ranging from 9th of May to 14th May. The plot size also varied by location, and the row spacing ranged between 21 to 31 centimeter, with the corresponding seedbed utilization from approximately 8% to 12%. All sites grew same variety, CDC spectrum, and used the same seeding rate, 100 seeds per meter square. Of course, adjusting for seed size and germination. Weeds were controlled using registered pre-emergent and in-crop herbicides. Fungicide applications reduce the potential for disease to be a limiting factor. Pre-harvest herbicides or desiccant were used at the discretion of individual site managers. And the plots were straight, combined after the peas had matured and sufficiently dried. And the harvest date ranged between August 19 and September 11. So let's talk about the weather conditions. It was like all sites were slightly warmer than normal in 2025. July was generally cooler than normal, especially at Scott and Indian Head. The overall temperature differences were very small. Indian Head was very dry, and it received almost like 56% of normal precipitation as compared to the long-term data range. Melfort was near normal with 105% of long-term average, and Scott was slightly below normal at 92% of long-term average with good June moistures. Swift Grant was much better than normal with 126% of average with strong July and August rainfalls. So if we look at the emergence data from this graph, we can see that the side-banded phosphorus did not reduce emergence at any site as compared to the control. But the seed placed did, reduced plant density at several locations. Like in-furrow placement reduced stands by approximately 9% compared with sideband placement. Products causing the most emergence reduction, as you can see here on the graph, is like MAP plus AMS and MES15. They were like seed placed. The fertilizer injury risk was greatest on the coarser soils with the low organic matter, particularly swift grunt and Scott. Moving to canopy cover. So the percent canopy cover at the late vegetative growth stages was lower at Indian Head, as you can see here, than the other three locations. However, this discrepancy was mainly attributed to the timing of the measurement and row spacing. Indian Head at Indian Head, all phosphorus treatment improved growths except side-banded Synchro 50, which is likely due to lower solubility and interference from co-banded urea and AMS. But if you see like treatment 7 and all the at all the locations, you can see a decline in canopy cover at all sites. At Malfoot, you can see that in-furrow treatments performed similar as compared to the side-banded. Scott had a pretty strong response to phosphorus as compared to no phosphorus in treatment 1 and treatment 2. But the significant difference between side-banded and in-furrow can be seen in Scott except Synchro 50. In Swift Grunt, you can see that side-banded outperformed the in-furrow treatments due to possible greater in-furrow toxicity. Overall, in average, all side-banded outperformed in-furrow treatments except the side-banded Synchro 50, which is same in at all the sites. And in the terms of canopy cover, you can see that MES15 did a good job. It was the best treatment as in terms of canopy cover. Okay, so we can see the Scott yield trends. The top performer at Scott was treatment 8, which is in-furrow MAP, with the highest overall yield of 4,532 kgs per hectare. The lowest yield apart from control was recorded in treatment 9, which is in-furrow MAP plus AMS, and the average yield is 3,943 kgs per hectare. Even the treatment 2 performed slightly better than treatment 9. The reason for the decreased yield could be the result of seedling injury in seed placed MAP plus AMS, which resulted in reduced emergence and plant density. Side-banded sulfur blends in treatment 5 and treatment 6 performed very well, and seed placed sulfur effects is like mixed, as you can see in the treatment 9, notably lower than other seed placed treatments. The controls behaved as expected, modest bump from the nitrogen alone versus no fertilizer in treatment 1. So the yield average across the sites. Indian Head had the highest average yield with 5,765 kgs per hectare, followed by Malfoot with 5,125 kgs per hectare, and Scott with 4,226 kgs per hectare, and the lowest was Swift Grunt with 3,002 kgs per hectare. The overall best treatment in terms of yield was treatment 8, which is in-furrow MAP, and the average yield of all the sites was 4,662 kgs per hectare, or 69.32 bushels per acre. Sorry. And the treatments with the lowest yield, apart from the control, was treatment 9. So the treatment 9, which is MAP, Infero MAP plus AMS, with the average yield of 4,472 kgs per hectare. The two best treatments in average were treatment 3 and treatment 8, which is side-banded MAP and Infero MAP. The best treatment at Indian. So actually, like the results were not like very consistent. So you as you can see that the best treatment at Indian Head and Melfort was treatment 10, that is Infero MES 15, but at Scott it was treatment 8, that is Infero MAP, and Swift Grunt was treatment 9, which is very unusual as compared to other sites. So the results were not consistent at all sites. So this is just another way of looking how the treatments performed in terms of yield, ranking from the highest to the lowest. So you can see the highest yielding treatment is side-banded MAP with the 69.32 bushels per acre. And the lowest is Infero MAP plus AMS at 66.5 bushels per acre. The Infero fertilizers don't show huge decline as compared to the side-banded, except Infero MAP plus AMS and side-banded MAP plus AMS. As you can see, this is ranked at the third, the side-banded MAP plus AMS, whereas Infero MAP plus AMS is ranked last. But the side-banded Synchro 50 and Infero Synchro 50 don't show huge difference in terms of yield. The average seed protein percentage was highest at Scott, followed by Swift Grunt with 20.7%, Melfort at 20.1%, and it was lowest at Indian Head at 18.7%. The trends which were essentially the inverse of what we observed for yield, even though there are not any conclusive evidence that suggests that which treatment had performed better. But if you see the overall average, you can see that treatment 6, which is side-banded MAP plus MST, and treatment 7, side-banded Synchro 50, they performed very well. But if we look separately at all sites, there is no consistency in the treatments. Indian had 3 treatments with the same results, which include treatment 2, that is nitrogen only, so it doesn't had any phosphorus, and the highest average protein percentage was recorded in control treatment 1. So yeah, as you can tell that it is not related to the phosphorus fertilizers. And the Scott shows highest protein percentage in treatment 3, that is side-banded MAP, but Swift Grunt shows highest protein in treatment 6, that is side-banded MAP plus MST. Generally, the side-banded treatments performed slightly better than Infero treatments, but there is not very huge difference between side-banded and Infero treatments. So the conclusions. So the side-banding phosphorus fertilizer is consistently safe and effective for field peas. Infero placement can cause seedling injury, especially with MAP plus AMS and MES 15, and the injury risk is greater in coarser soils with low organic matter, with highest risk at Swift Grunt, followed by Scott and Melfort, with lowest at Indian Head. So the yield responses to phosphorus ranged from small and essentially not significant at Indian Head, with approximately 3%, more intermediate at Melford with 5% and Scott with 7%, and highest at Swift Current with 10%. Averaged across sites, the phosphorus and sulfur fertilizer products increased field P yields by approximately 6%, when nitrogen was balanced, and 8% when compared to no fertilizer at all. With no significant differences between side-banded MAP versus side-banded MAP plus AMS, we can be confident that observed yield increases were attributable to phosphorus and not sulfur. Protein was not affected by any of the treatments at Indian Head, Melford, or Scott, but was negatively affected by seed-placed fertilizer at Swift Current, particularly for MES15. The main reason for this discrepancy is unclear, but maybe have been due to the greater fertilizer injury. So the overall side bending is preferred placement option for most cases. In-furrow may benefit early growth with Synchro 50, while the profitability of field P yield responses to sulfur may be low, but balanced fertility is always a worthy consideration. However, our results suggest that seed placing sulfur, that is AMS or MES15, should be avoided due to due to injury risk. The elemental sulfur can be used as long-term strategy since it may not be available to crop in the same year of application. MAP plus MST does not increase injury risk relative to MAP and Synchro 50, and also does not reduce risk compared to MAP. And novel phosphorus forms like MES15, MAP plus MST, and Synchro 50 showed no clear advantage over MAP alone, but may be suitable in certain situations. So at the end, MAP remains the best benchmark product so far. So in the overall results, the best combination is the side-banded MAP or the side-banded MAP plus MST, whereas the worst combination is in-furrow MAP plus AMS or in-furrow MES15. So please mark your calendar for July 8th, 2026, as it is a field day at Scott. It is hosted by Western Applied Research Corporation at Wark Acreage, which is north of railroad tracks, Highway 374 Scott, and the registration will start at 9 a.m. So thank you all for listening, and thank you again to the funders and collaborators of this project. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you for the presentation here this morning. And that's a good reminder on the field days. Like I said earlier this morning, you can actually just click onto the materials section of the webinar, and there's a poster for all the field days of all the AgriARM sites. So with that, we're running a little tight for time, so we're just going to limit it to one question. But the question is, does crystal green get applied the same way as other fertilizers?
It was applied. So there were like two different treatments. The one was side-banded and the other one was seed placed. And with that, the AMS, 78 kg of AMS was side-banded with both treatments. Okay. Yeah.
In crystal green, it's just like a granular that you can put through the drill,
yeah.
Correct?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, I think with that, we're going to move on to our next presentation, but thank you for joining us here this morning.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thanks.
Okay, so next up, we have Ashbir from the Irrigation Saskatchewan location of the AgriARM site, and that is around Outlook. So we'll get to hear from him. Alrighty, I can see your presentation. And
Hello?
you. Perfect, I can hear you loud and clear.
Oh,
You're good to
okay,
go.
so perfect. All right. Okay, so I will start my presentation by giving you the Irrigation in Saskatchewan 2025 field season general overview. And I will be giving a special emphasis on one trial that is Xanthomonas translucent causing BLS of cereals. And we kick off this presentation with is it changing for you there? But I don't see here.
It looks like it's still just your present or your opening slide there.
Okay. Let me cancel.
Any luck on your side getting that sorted?
No, I think yes. Let me try one more time here.
Alrighty, I think Rebecca's sending it back to you.
Okay, I think it's working right now. Is it?
I can see your camera, but I can't see your screen. So I think Rebecca took away the presenter mode and put it back to you. So you'll have to accept it.
Oh.
Okay, I can see your desktop. Perfect. I see 2020. Oh, there. And if you click
so I think it's working right now, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, perfect.
There we go.
Sorry about that. All right, so I will start my talking from just the beginning. In this presentation, I will be covering the 2025 field season research overview with a special emphasis on one trial, that is Xanthomonas translucent causing BLS of cereals. BLS stands for bacterial leaf streak. It's not changing, huh?
No, it's not changing again. Maybe try exiting out and just putting it back into presenter mode there.
Okay.
Sorry, folks, you'll just have to bear with us as we get through this. Honestly, with the amount of presenters we have, if we only had one issue this morning, we're doing great. Okay, I can see your presentation. Can you click through it? Okay. Perfect, I can see it.
Okay, let's hope it continues like that. Okay, sorry again. In my presentation, I will be covering the 2025 field season general overview with a special emphasis on one trial, that is Xanthomonas translucent causing BLS of cereals, and BLS stands for bacterial leaf streak. In 2025, we had a total of 54 projects, and with cereal and pulses being the dominant crop type, if you see the research category by crop. And if we dissect these two crop category down the picture below, we see that regional variety trial in cereals and regional variety trial in pulses become the dominant one, followed by forward nutrient stewardship in cereals. And when it comes to pulses, the regional variety trial is followed by disease trials. Speaking about disease, in total, last year we had a total of 10 disease trials. And with pulses and cereal disease trial, for example, the pulses disease trial primarily focused on phanomyces and aphanomyces and associated root rot complex diseases. And the other disease that we covered and continue to do investigation on is bacterial leaf streak, and which is the subject of my today's presentation. And in this presentation, I will be covering introductory information about this disease, and I will be touching on the pathogen life cycle and sign and symptom, management strategy, and current bacterial leaf streak study that Irrigation Saskatchewan is conducting. And I will be sharing the results that we have obtained so far. And I want to kick off this section of my presentation by asking a question, and which is why it is important to talk about bacterial leaf streak. And well, it is because of two reasons. And the first one is this disease is becoming popular in the prairie provinces. And the reason is, one, it is there is increase in favorable conditions, and the other one is increased awareness. For example, when it comes to increased awareness, platforms like this one, webinar, conferences, and presentations are actually helping agronomists and producers to be able to detect the disease in their field condition, and that's actually increasing the report. So the pathogen is also, the disease is becoming more popular across the prairie provinces. And the other one is infection, like loss of productivity due to this pathogen can reach up to 50% under field condition in a field that is infested with this pathogen. So the picture here on the right side shows the patchy distribution of bacterial leaf streak under field condition. So the disease, as I said earlier, it's caused by bacteria, and there are different pathovars of this bacteria. And for example, the first pathovar, Ankylosa, Xanthomonas translucent pathovar Ankylosa, primarily causes disease, that bacterial leaf streak in barley and wheat, whereas pathovar translucent causes this same disease primarily on barley. And another pathovar known as cerealis of the same pathogen causes bacterial leaf streak in perennial grasses. So from this, we can understand that this pathogen has a wide range of hosts, including wheat, barley, oats, triticale, and perennial grasses. Now let's see the life cycle of this pathogen. And I will be starting from number one there in the picture. And number one shows infected seed. And it is believed that the initial disease onset or disease-causing agent starts from infected seed. And planting infected seed, and upon emerging, that plant pathogen will be transferred into the aerial parts of the plant, as we can see in that early seedling, number two. And as the plant continues to grow, that bacteria will also get transferred into the whole length of the plant and causing that first streak, a watery, soaked white discoloration of the plant leaf in most cases. And as the plant continues to grow, this disease symptom advances into the plant head and causing quality impact and also decline in harvest. So upon harvest, as we can see there on number 5, so we will be getting decreased yield, quantity or amount, and also in terms of quality, the quality becomes compromised. Not only that, upon harvest, the bacteria will also be left behind, and this can overwinter in soil, as well as debris and any associated plant material that is left behind upon after harvest. And this is also becomes sufficient enough to cause another disease cycle if you are planting a susceptible crop, or if not, if there is a weedy plant species that is susceptible by this pathogen. So that the life cycle continues like this. And it is always good to understand the life cycle of a given pathogen from different perspectives. For example, pathologists working in a sophisticated lab or a lab containing weight investigations, they can so understanding the life cycle help them to understand susceptible phases of the life cycle of that pathogen, so that that can be easily targeted by the kind of treatment strategy that is going to be developed. It could be chemical, biological, but it is good to understand that susceptible phases of the pathogen life cycle. And from agronomist point of view, it is good to understand the life cycle of the pathogen, because it will help us understand the early signs of the disease. And in that way, we can have management strategy, which is integrated approach in that cropping season, as well as in the following cropping season. So with this, now let's see the sign and symptom of this disease. The bacterial leaf streak sign and symptom starts with watery soaked lesion on the plant surface, which continues to turn into chlorotic as the plant continues to grow, and also as the disease symptom advances. However, this is not the diagnostic feature of the disease. And here we see that key diagnostic feature of this bacterial leaf streak disease. So the disease can appear as milky white droplet on the leaf surface, or it can appear as yellowish droplets on the plant material, on the plant parts. And so this is the key diagnostic feature of this bacterial leaf streak. And sometimes this milky white can appear as translucent, from which the bacteria attained its name, Xanthomonas translucent, that translucent appearance. So you may wonder, so you told us that this pathogen under infested situation can cause a yield reduction up to 50%. So for something that much troublesome, what is the management strategy? So currently there is no foliar or seed treatment fungicide. Well, they are not going to work, because the nature of this pathogen is quite different from fungal species. This is a bacterial caused disease. So foliar or seed treatment fungicide that are currently available for many other several diseases, they are not going to work. And the effective approach is integrated disease management strategy, starting with using clean seed, and also staying vigilant when scouting for disease, and also expanding crop rotation. Crop rotation becomes very important here, because the pathogen has multiple hosts, and it is good not to grow that susceptible crop in that crop rotation scheme. And the other one is varietal selection. This is a science that is currently under progress. However, there is no resistant variety for this pathogen as of now that farmers can grow. And the other one is irrigation management. So irrigation is, water in general is the lifeline of crop. However, too much irrigation, too much water exposes crop for diseases such as Xanthomonas translucent. And with this extended background, now I want to take you to the current study that Irrigation Saskatchewan is conducting on this disease. So as I said earlier, the title of this study is Xanthomonas translucent causing BLS of cereals. So under that study, under that title, Irrigation Saskatchewan established a 3-year project. And in 2025, we conducted the second year of that same study. And we also have one more year of this study in 2026 field season. And this study was conducted or is being conducted with the objective to determine seed to seedling transmission rate of this disease. And the other one is to establish risk threshold levels. And now I'm going to take you back to that pathogen life cycle, because it directly relates to the pathogen life cycle of the objective directly relates to the pathogen life cycle. And as I said earlier, the life cycle pathogen starts from infected seed. So in this study, we are trying to understand the seed to seedling transmission rate of this pathogen by growing infected seed, and then we are investigating if that disease symptom can actually happen in that seedling, and the rate at which that disease is also appearing in the seedling, another part of that same objective. And the other one is risk threshold level determination is another part of this study objective. For this, to better understand, I will take you to my next slide. So in this study, we have 5 different treatments starting from number 1 to 5, where number 1 or it's untreated control, 0% presence of this disease-causing agent, and the others are treated seeds with the treatment starting from number 2, 3, 4, and 5, starting from 1% to 100% bacterial treatment. And we are testing this bacteria on 2 crops, that is wheat and barley, and they are growing under dryland and irrigation-based system. So the picture down there shows the last year trial, where the picture on the 2 right side, the 2 pictures on the right side are the irrigated one. The picture on the left side are the dryland trials. So now I'll take you to results that we have obtained. So in barley, there was that early seedling infection. So the watery soaked lesion in the plant leaf surface was observed. However, the disease did not advance to the adult stage of the plant. So we did not detect disease symptom in barley that is grown in both dryland as well as irrigation-based trial. And however, that is quite different when it comes to when the crop is wheat. Here, wheat under irrigation, the graph on your screen shows the x-axis at the growth stage of the plant, whereas the y-axis shows the disease rating. And as we can see here, the disease appeared in that flag leaf stage and continue to exist across the plant growth stage. And the disease symptom, which is a reflection of the disease severity there, is also a reflection of the rate at which the seed was treated. So one thing that is surprising is that the non-inoculated also showed disease symptom in this trial. Now we'll take you to the other trial, which is under dryland condition. And the same result was observed in here as well. The x-axis similarly showing you the growth stage, whereas the y-axis is showing you the disease severity rating. And as we can see here, as the plant continues to grow, it is still carrying that disease symptom starting from the flag leaf stage. And similar to that previous slide, we also here saw untreated plots also showing disease symptom. And from this trial, the takeaway message is that bacterial leaf streak is primarily a seed-borne disease, but it can overwinter in cereal and perennial grasses. And symptoms can appear as watery soaked or lesion or streak, and this can produce a milky white or yellowish exudates of droplets on the plant leaf surface. And the other one is bacterial leaf streak and bacterial chaff cannot be controlled using foliar or seed treatment fungicide, and management cannot be achieved management can only be achieved through an integrated approach, starting from clean seed and also optimizing your agronomic practices. And this study was possible through the collaborative support of several organizations and partner, Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture and the University of Saskatchewan, and also many other community groups. So with this, I conclude my part of the 25 field season overview, which gave a special emphasis on Xanthomonas translucent disease. And I have one slide that I would like to share, which I believe can just keep Irrigation Saskatchewan myself more motivated about the 2026 field season. And in 2025, we had 54 projects. This year as well, we are going to have, based on the information that is available so far, we are going to have 53 projects. And we recently got fundings for cannery seed production and oilseed sunflower trials, which are going to be part of this new year trial. And I am excited to see how these projects are going to turn out to be. And with that, I have concluded my part of presentation. But if you have questions and comments, I would be happy to address them. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for the presentation there, Ashbir. I just want to double down. I know you already said it in the presentation, but number one, fungicides are not going to touch BLS. It's a bacteria. And then number two is this last field season, we had a lot more questions or like pictures get sent in that looked suspect of bacterial leaf streak. And with that, I just highly encourage people to send stuff away to the lab. We have the crop protection lab in Regina. They can help diagnose this. And I think it might be flying under the radar in a lot more fields in Saskatchewan than we're currently aware of. So with that, we have time for just one question to try and keep us on time here. But some producers use copper for its antimicrobial effects. Do you recommend this? And if so, what rate?
Well, that is a good question. For most bacterial diseases, well, copper is known to have that antimicrobial activity. However, there are no published results saying copper is useful for bacterial leaf streak, or it's not part of the recommendation for managing bacterial leaf streak. And as I said earlier, to control this disease, the approach is integrated pest management approach, which is common to many other diseases. But copper as part of research, something that is to be investigated, but for field-based application, I wouldn't recommend as a pathologist as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Ashbir. So like I said, with that, we have, we're just a little tight for time. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Ashbir after. Like I said, we will be sending out an email that has the recording link in it, any resources, and then also the contact info for each of the sites. But thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Yeah,
okay, next up, last but certainly not least, is Ashita Patel, and she is out of NARF. I always forget all the acronyms. Northeast Research, what is it? Northeast Agriculture Research Foundation. We speak in only acronyms like 90% of the time, so sometimes I forget the full length thing. But with that, you go ahead, Ashita, and I'll catch you for questions at the end.
Awesome, thanks, Ali. Can you just confirm that you can hear me? And if I advance my slide, you can. It's going okay?
Yes, I can hear and see you. And then if you want to advance your slide. Perfect. Looks good.
Oh, awesome. Okay, thank you. And thank you to everybody who has stuck around so far. I hope I make it worth it for you by talking a little bit about the intercropping trials that we had at NARF this past year. The trial combinations that I'm going to be touching on would be the faba bean with wheat, faba bean with canola, winter camelina with chickling vetch, winter wheat with chickling vetch, winter wheat with red clover. And before I proceed any further, I would like to acknowledge the funding that was received for all of these trials was through the ADOPT program, which was funded under the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, which is a partnership between the federal government and the provinces and the territories. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So our first trial that we're going to be looking at is the faba bean with wheat trial. So anytime I talk about intercropping trials, the first question usually that comes up is, what are the herbicides they can use on this one? So for this combination, the herbicides bentazone and trifluralin can be used. Now, on our site last year, we had the wheat variety AC Elida, VB, which was seeded in the seed row at the regular monocrop rate, and faba bean variety that we used was CDC 1142, which was seeded in the mid row and also at the monocrop rate. So even for the intercropping combinations, they were both seeded at their respective monocrop rates. And the reason I differentiated one crop in the seed row, one crop in the mid row was because I want to make sure that they don't compete with each other when they're emerging. The trial was seeded on May 26th at NARF, and it was harvested on October 10th without any desiccants being applied. Soil test was conducted before the trial was seeded, and the total fertility was so that it's non-limiting to the cash crop, or to wheat in this case. We had 4 treatments. We had monocrop of wheat, monocrop of faba bean, and we had 2 intercropping treatments of faba bean and wheat. One at 100% nitrogen rate and one at a reduced 80% nitrogen rate. So the rationale behind this was to see if including a leguminous crop would maintain yield even if the nitrogen rate was lowered. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about that we evaluated a whole bunch of things. So some of the things I'm going to touch on for in the interest of time here would be the effective nitrogen rates on yield, and we did some economic analysis as well to figure out what treatment was profitable given the circumstances, and we also measured water infiltration. So before I move on to the results, I just want to talk a little bit about water infiltration for those of you who might not be aware. So it's basically a measure of soil compaction, or how well the drainage is. And you are measuring how quickly does water seep into the ground. So what happens is that you take a metal ring of a certain diameter, you put saran wrap over it, and then you add to it a predetermined amount of water, which would be simulating an inch of rainfall. So you pour that water onto the saran wrap, you take off the saran wrap, and then you calculate or you record the time that it takes for the water to seep into the ground. And so the quicker the water seeps into the ground, the better infiltration there is in the soil, and the longer it takes, the more compacted usually the soil is with poor drainage. And here's just us doing water infiltration this past fall. Okay, so moving on to the results. I have kind of included everything in one slide so that you get a clearer picture of what's going on. First, we're going to look at the yield here on the top left. So I've got all the treatments here, and I've got wheat yield and faba bean yield. And looking at them, you could see that the wheat monocrops had the highest yield, whether it was the case of wheat or faba bean. And the average yield of wheat was kind of low. It was 49 bushels an acre. Now, if you look at water infiltration, we found that the wheat monocrop took the longest, water took the longest in the wheat monocrop to get into the ground, but the presence of faba bean made that time, reduce that time. So the water infiltrated faster wherever faba bean was present in the treatment. Looking at economic analysis, these are the seeding costs that I took into account. So wheat was $23 an acre, faba bean $92 an acre, and the sale price, I know prices were pretty low, was $6.5 per bushel and $7 per bushel for faba bean. Urea, I think it's gone up now, but at the time of these, I had $800 per metric ton of urea. So looking at the profit loss analysis, then everything had net profit, but the highest net profit was in the wheat monocrop. But the next highest net profit was when faba bean was seeded with wheat at 80% nitrogen rate, and this was higher than this profit was higher than the intercropping combination at 100% nitrogen rate. Okay, so moving on to our next trial, which is faba bean with canola. Here's a bunch of list of herbicides that you can use in this combination, and it's recommended that you use a clear field canola variety so that it increases your options for herbicides, which is you could use the Imazamox and Imazapapir. And so at NARF, this trial, for this trial, we had faba bean was the same, seeded in the mid row. Canola was seeded in the seed row, and both of the seeding rates were also at their monocrop rates. And again, soil fertility was applied, or soil fertility was taken into account, and the fertilizer applied was to make sure that the canola's nutrient requirements were all taken care of at 40 bushels an acre yield target. Okay, so our treatments were monocrops of canola and faba bean. And then again, like in the previous trial, we had 100% nitrogen rate for the intercrop and 80% nitrogen for the nitrogen rate for the intercrop. The things that we evaluated was, again, the effect of nitrogen rates on yield, which treatment was profitable. Water infiltration had no significant difference, but we did do that as well, but I'm not going to be including those results. And we also calculated land equivalent ratio. So for those of you who might not know, or to just kind of have a refresher, land equivalent ratio is basically a measure of how efficient your intercropping system was compared to the monocropping system. So it's a measure of your over yielding or under yielding in the case of an intercrop versus a monocrop. So for example, if I were to calculate the land equivalent ratio for canola and faba bean that were grown at 100% nitrogen rate, I put in canola yield when it was intercropped at 100% N rate, and then same yield when canola was monocropped. So not the same yield, but canola yield when it was monocropped. And then to that, I added the faba bean yield when it was intercropped at 100% N rate, and the faba bean yield when it was monocropped. So basically, it gives you a measure of what proportion of your yield was produced by the intercrop compared to your monocrop. Now, when you add both of these values, if you get a land equivalent ratio greater than 1, it means your intercropping system was more efficient than your monocropping system, and you had over yielding. If you get the ratio lower than 1, then that means that your monocrops performed better, and so there was your intercropping system was not efficient. Okay, so jumping to the results. Canola with faba bean yield, faba beans in both the nitrogen rates as well as canola monocrop, the results were not really scientifically different. The yield results were not scientifically different from each other. Same in the case of faba beans as well. Canola yield was pretty low in this case as well. But when you look at the land equivalent ratio, we find that the intercrops were definitely more efficient than monocrops, with the land equivalent ratio being more than 1. And so in the case of 100% N rate, it was 50% more efficient. And in the case of 80% N rate, the intercropping system was 25% more efficient. Now, looking at the economic analysis, for this, the revenue or the selling price of canola that I considered was $14 a bushel, and faba beans were $7 a bushel, and urea was the same as last trial. And what we found was that canola, when intercropped with faba beans at 100% nitrogen rate, was the most profitable, and that was followed by the monocrops. So it does seem like when we included faba beans, it did kind of offset some of the losses that we would have encountered. Okay, so so that was our spring seeded cereals and oil seeds with the faba beans. Now we're going to look at the fall seeded oilseed and cereal crops with leguminous cover companion crops. So the intercropping combinations that we're going to be looking at here would be winter camelina with chickling vetch, winter wheat with chickling vetch, winter wheat with red clover, which were both seeded in the fall of 2024, winter camelina. Just if you don't know, this is what it looks like. It's a very tiny seed. It's an oil seed crop. It's small seeded and it's low input. So usually fertility is about 2/3 of what you would use for canola. It is usually contracted out by companies like, so winter camelina production is contracted out by companies like Bayer, New Seed, and Smart-Earth Camelina, which is a Saskatchewan company, also contracts out Camelina acres. Chickling vetch is a nitrogen-fixing leguminous crop. It's mostly used for forage, and its seed, basically, if you've never seen before, you wouldn't even know that it's seed because it just looks like little pebbles. And the bushel weight is about the same as wheat, which is 60 pounds per bushel. And so, yeah, there's a big difference between the seed sizes of these. For our chickling, so all the fall seeded crops were seeded on August 30th of 2024. Chickling vetch, though, is not winter hardy, so it was seeded in early May of 2025. And we don't have the capability of seeding stuff in between the rows with our little small plug seeder, so we had to use this prehistoric, very ancient hand-driven seeder, where on the top we put seed and we had to push it. And the problem with this was that it couldn't really go very deep into the ground. Our ground was very dry in May, and we got no rain all of May. So the chickling vetch, it being big seeded, also didn't really germinate until we got those June rains. So that was kind of the downside of seeding it this way, but this was our only option to be able to seed it. Okay, so the setup of winter camelina with chickling vetch. Herbicides, there were no herbicides that we could use in crop for this. The treatments were monocrop of winter camelina at 100% nitrogen rate, and monocrop of chickling vetch at 0% nitrogen rate, because chickling vetch is nitrogen fixing, so we didn't provide it any nitrogen. Intercrops, and then intercrops of winter camelina with chickling vetch at 2 different nitrogen rates, so 80% nitrogen and 60% nitrogen. And I should mention that in our monocrop treatments, or sorry, in our intercrop treatments, we did reduce the seeding rate of our crops by 80%. Okay, so chickling vetch variety that we used was AC Green Fix that was donated to us by Kyle Heggie from Estale Acres in Lyra, Saskatchewan. The winter camelina variety was Joel, which was donated to us by Bayer. Fertility was so that the nutrients are non-limiting for winter camelina, which, like I mentioned before, was 2/3 the fertility of canola. Evaluations for this trial that were done were effects of nitrogen rates on yield, which treatment was profitable, and the land equivalent ratio. So, like I was saying before, chickling vetch did not really grow, did not really emerge until later. By the time camelina was very, very far ahead. And so, and even the chickling vetch's emergence wasn't too great either in this scenario because it was seeded so shallow. It couldn't really get seeded into moisture. But the monocrop treatments of chickling vetch that we seeded here, next slide, the monocrop treatments of chickling vetch that we seeded with our seeder, which allowed the seed to go into moisture in the ground, seeded really well. But again, you can see the stark difference in maturities. So the yield of chickling vetch and all the intercropping treatments, so this was supposed to be an intercropping treatment, was 0 because there was no chickling vetch seed that was produced in this case, because we had to combine camelina much earlier than chickling vetch could mature. And so yeah, so pretty much all the data for the intercropping treatments are just for the winter camelina in this case, and not really chickling vetch. And we found that for yield, winter camelina yielded similar between the different nitrogen rates. Chickling vetch actually performed really good at our site. It was our first time growing it. And I asked the producer that we got the seed from Lyras, I asked him, what is your average yield that you usually see for chickling vetch? And he said usually they see 1,500 pounds per acre, but we got over double that. So we had really high yields of chickling vetch, even though we had heavy lodging. I'm going to show you pictures after. When you compare the land equivalent ratio, it was almost 1, where at 80% N it was like 0.05% higher than the monocrop treatment, but it was so close. There was really no over or under yielding. Economic analysis, I've included these prices here for you, because if you're wanting to try one of these crops, you should know what the prices look like. The winter camelina price is actually what Bayer is contracting out for winter camelina this year. So this I got from there. Chickling vetch price I got from Cushman at Imperial Seed. And what we find is, again, the chickling vetch was produced the highest profit, because I think it's because of the very high yield. And the other, when it comes to other treatments, the profit kind of followed the nitrogen rates. The higher nitrogen rate, the more profit you got per acre. Okay, so on to our last trial, which is winter wheat with chickling vetch and red clover. Again, for this, we couldn't use any herbicides in crop. The treatments were monocrop of winter wheat at 100% nitrogen rate, monocrops of red clover and chickling vetch at 0% N, because both of them are nitrogen fixing. And then the intercrop combinations were winter wheat with chickling vetch, which you can see here. The little blue flowers are chickling vetch, winter wheat with red clover, and both were at 2 different nitrogen rates at 80% N and 60% N. So the winter wheat and red clover were both seeded in the fall of 2024, but chickling vetch was seeded in the spring of last year, so 2025. Again, the same variety of chickling vetch. Red clover was donated to us by Clayton Meyer at DLF Pig Seed near Nipawin, and it was also seeded in the seed row with winter wheat, where it was intercropped. Winter wheat was actually donated to us, I think, by CLC, so thank you. We used AC Cold Front. And fertility was so that it's non-limiting for winter wheat, which is the major cash crop in this trial. And the evaluations were similar to last trial, where it was effective nitrogen rates on yield, economic analysis, and land equivalent ratio. So when we compare yield across treatments, we found that winter wheat that was intercropped with red clover, so RC, or chickling vetch at 80% N rate produced similar yields to when winter wheat was monocropped. So keep in mind that in these intercropping treatments, we are reducing the seeding rate of winter wheat as well. And it's still produced similar to when winter wheat was monocropped at the monocrop seeding rate. So it does seem like including the leguminous crops does make a difference, and it doesn't really lead to a yield penalty, even with reduced rates of reduced seeding rates. Okay, and the average yield of winter wheat was 69 bushels an acre. When we looked at the land equivalent ratios, it seemed like if you're looking to intercrop them, only intercrop them at 80% nitrogen rates, because if you go to 60%, then you're getting lower than 1 LERs, which means that your intercropping system is not being efficient. You might as well be monocropping them. For economic analysis, these are the prices that I used. So for winter wheat, I used $7 a bushel, red clover, $1.5 a pound, which is, again, I think I got this from DLF Pig Seed, and chickling vetch, again, got it from Cushman at Imperial Seed. And when we look at the profit that we got across all treatments, the highest profit was of course when chickling vetch was monocrop, because it just yielded so much higher. It yielded higher than the average, that is 1,500, according to the producer. But it did yield lower in this trial compared to the trial with winter camelina, where it yielded double or like over 3,000 pounds per acre. Okay, so most profitable were in the intercropping situations were the winter wheat with red clover at 80% nitrogen. And that was actually even more profitable than winter wheat grown monocropped at 100% nitrogen. So before I leave you guys, if you are looking to maybe try, or if you wanna try it, I wanna tell you kind of what to expect and what we saw. So we did see very heavy lodging in chickling vetch, but and of course red clover a little bit as well. But we did find that despite the lodging, the yields were really high for chickling vetch at our site. Red clover, if I could remind you, was seeded in fall of 2024 along with winter wheat in its intercropping treatments. It was seeded on August 30th, and it stayed green even after winter wheat was harvested. So and it was still growing. It was still increasing the biomass in the soil. So that leads me to believe that growing red clover this way, as it could be a good cover crop option. Red clover could be a good cover crop option where you can grow it you can seed it with winter wheat at the same time without it incurring a yield penalty, and you could even lower the end rate. So it does look like it will provide you with more soil health benefits, and it could be just a nice cover crop throughout into the fall. I don't know if this will produce anything next year. I'm assuming it will, but sadly the trial doesn't continue until next year. But I would like to keep an eye on if this does go on and produce anything. Plus, red clover also increases your pollinators, right? So you could have pretty little. You could just kind of help the environment out a little bit with including red clover while reducing your costs as well. Okay, so thank you for sticking around so far. You must all be really hungry, but I really appreciate you being here. And thank you again to the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership, Government of Canada, Government of Saskatchewan. And if you have any questions, I have reports written out on both of these, all these trials that I talked about. So if you have any questions, if you would like me to send you the report, you can totally reach out to me on my email. And we're on Blue Sky and Twitter as well. And please come to our field day. It's July 15th and 16th this year. And if you want to know, if you want to be added to the list for me to send you an invite to the field day, then feel free to email me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashita, for the presentation. So just one question for you. And actually your last slide there probably helped answer it a little, but how was it with the difficulty of harvesting these crops and getting them off the field?
Okay, so I can tell you that red clover plots actually plugged every single plot plugged. So that was not fun. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. All right, yes, I can leave it there. Yeah, so red clover plugged, and red clover actually did not really dry. We had problems with drying down. We had to desiccate it twice. We desiccated with glyphosate and then with Reglone as well, and we finally just had to harvest it wet. With the winter wheat and canola, or so not winter wheat. So okay, so winter wheat and chickling vetch, that all went fine. Chickling vetch went fine. When it came to the fava bean and wheat, that went fine. Fava bean and canola plugged once. So not the smoothest, but I guess because we also did not desiccate the fava bean and wheat and fava bean and canola trials, so maybe that kind of led to it not being harvested as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for your presentation. Alrighty, folks. So with that wraps up our presentation here this morning. I just, before we go here, want to really highlight a huge thank you to all the AgriARM sites for hopping on today. We are incredibly lucky in Saskatchewan to have these 8 sites where we're getting research that's actually applicable on farm based on soil zones and the environmental factors. So a huge thank you to them for joining, but also a thank you for just the research they do. I highly suggest getting out there this summer, talking to the folks at the farm and hitting up their field days to see what you can take that you can apply right directly onto your farm too. So with that, we are going to wrap up the webinar here. I will be sharing the CCA code, QR